evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We have an awesome show for you between Robbinthestate, Looter, Dylan Blay, and Fabian Liberty. They will be answering the question, is the existence of the state necessary?
Yo, this Fabian shit's got to go.
Statists versus anarchists. All debaters have been briefed in the background how this will go down, so we are all ready to go. But
the noose is in the logo.
Before we get to that, we would request you all watch this episode through Twitch right now by clicking the link at the top of the description or pinned in the top of the live chat. We are a young channel, ladies and gentlemen, and are constantly trying to expand. Like, share, subscribe, and if you feel you want to help us create something for this to grow even more and keep that nice steady drip of content going, donate to us through our PayPal. Join and become a member on our YouTube channel, or become a patron. Any and everything helps us complete the work we are trying to do ultimately, which is create a battleground, a public square where we can fight for and proclaim the truth. Welcome back, and glad to have you, everyone. This is the Crucible. Enjoy.
Yeah, that Fabian shit. I feel like at this point people are just doing it for the memes. I'm just gonna have to accept it. It's Leviosa, not Leviosa. Just Alex Jones it. Name's Fabian.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Pedro, co-owner of The Crucible. And obviously, like you've already seen, we are here for a debate tonight. But first, say what's up, Andrew.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to The Crucible. We're going to see, I think, just a little bit of blood tonight. I've been looking forward to this one for most of the month, except, of course, Dylan's going to be here. But we're going to let that pass. Right? We're going to let that pass. And welcome to The Crucible first. To Dylan, how you doing tonight, buddy?
Good. How you doing, Andrew? Happy to be here.
Good.
Happy that you're happy I'm here, of course.
Right. You were the one I was looking
Statism
forward to
all the way?
the
No,
most,
sir.
Dylan. As you could see from the intro, right, you were the one that we wanted on here more than anybody else.
I know you're just killing to get me on, Andrew. Just killing for me.
Dying for it, buddy. Why don't you shout out your channel to everybody where they can find you, Dylan?
Yeah, so you can find me on YouTube under the name Dylan Blay, and you can find me on Spotify at Dylan Blay as well. I release my own original music there. I mostly do political stuff, of course, though online.
Wait, are you a rapper, Dylan?
The mainstream is,
I make
is
like
on the bottom.
indie
It's,
music.
Dylan
Okay,
Blay.
cool. Just checking.
Makes Canadian music.
I'm sorry,
Wherever
why did I say
Canadian
Dylan Blay?
music
No, it's
is,
not.
Evil,
It's
evil Canadian
Big Papa
music.
Fascist, but it's
Looter,
the
how you
Crucible.
doing tonight, buddy? How's life treating you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having
On
me. guys. I
YouTube
appreciate
and
it.
on Twitch, I believe.
Absolutely. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, Looter?
Yeah, I mean, you guys can find me both on Twitch and Twitter. Same handle. It's _ Looter.
Okay. Robbinthestate, how are you?
Hello, everyone. Yeah, you can find me everywhere as Robbinthestate. YouTube, Twitch is the same. And I also have an Instagram account where I post some of my drawings and the progress of my comic book. And it's Western manga. That's it for the comic.
Why do you sound like you're a Russian hitman, dude? Where are you from? Cuban.
I'm Cuban, yeah.
It's Cuban.
Wait, Lucas, really quick. Do you read One Piece?
Yeah.
Heck yeah. There we go. Good
We
man.
got something. Next up,
It's very long, so.
next up we've got Fabian Liberty, who Pedro always calls Fabian Liberty. I think it's because he has long hair, so for some reason Pedro can't make the distinction. I don't know. How you doing tonight, Fabian? How's
No
life
long
treating
hair
you?
tonight, boys. No long hair tonight. Hopefully you can get it right. All right, it is Fabian.
Fabian.
You know, but hey, you know what? We'll just embrace the meme at a certain point. It's Wingardium Leviosa, not Wingardium Leviosa. That being said, you can find my channel. I'm a duo stream on Twitch with my partner Mark, Anarcho-Capitalist stream, primarily on Twitch at Fabian Liberty. Same name on YouTube. Please don't follow me on Twitter. If you find me on Twitter, fuck you. Get off of Twitter. The only reason that I have a Twitter is so that I can read things on Twitter without getting annoying messages from Twitter. But that being said, we will be hopefully making a Rumble here soon. We just want to make sure that we stay past that threshold so that we can auto have all of our stuff on Rumble. But Rumble coming soon.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for that intro, Fabian. Now, for the audience, just in case you don't know, when we do a group format, it's a little bit different. So the sides are set, as you can see on your screen. Each side will have 10 minutes total, 5 minutes apiece per debater to make their opening statement. After their opening statement is done, the floor will be open. We will create order from the chaos. We promise. We estimate the debate will take between somewhere around an hour and a half to 2 hours because there's so many people. This is the expectation tonight. We're going to kick it off, and we're going to let Lucas start with his opening statement. We'll move over to Dylan, from Dylan to Fabian, from Fabian to Luder. Go ahead, Lucas, with your open.
All right. The word anarchy, N meaning no, anarchos meaning master, is nothing more than the rejection of the slavery of men by men, something so moral, the rejection of the right of some men to enslave other men. The fact that we have to advocate for it makes you think about the, pun intended, of the state of our society. Some people that choose to not engage with the arguments proposed by us anarchists pretend that anarchy just means out of control, that it will be chaos, but no. Anarchy isn't out of control, it's out of your control. Anarchy isn't chaos. Anarchy is just the mother of order. Well, some people may wonder, why are we anarchists? As if being against slavery wasn't enough. Well, we are anarchists because the advocates of the state do not say that it's okay to take a men's rifle to stop a horrible tragedy in a rare occasion. No. They say that killing, murder, and stealing from civil humans, that these are the things that the advocates of the state say that we must and should do to have a civilized society. We reject that. And we say that these actions that the advocates of the state defend, these actions are directly the opposite of what civilized men will do. They create things like the so-called social contract to justify the killing, theft, and murder of their fellow men. And to that I have some words that I want to share. In regard to the so-called social contract, I have often had an occasion to protest that I haven't even seen the contract, much less being asked to consent to it. A valid contract requires voluntary offer, acceptance, and consideration. I've never received an offer from my rulers, so I certainly have not accepted one. And rather than consideration, I have received nothing but contempt from the Okay.
Who's that?
I'll just continue. And so certainly I have not accepted one, and rather than consideration, I have received nothing but contempt from the rulers, who, notwithstanding the absence of agreement, have undoubtedly threatened me with the grave harm in the event that I fail to comply with their edicts. Robert Higgs. And I cede the rest of my time.
Okay, Dylan, you're
No,
up.
that was Luder.
Hey, really quick, everybody else just mute yourself. Obviously, this is supposed to be listening time. Go for it, Dylan.
All right, great. So I think when we're talking about this debate of anarchism versus statism, it's important to stress in a topic like this how something like anarchism versus a state would materialize into the real world. While ideas of freedom for all men and absence of force sound delightful, they're a delusion of grandeur. Humans aren't, as virtuous as we think they are. My case for a state is reliant on the understanding that humans are immoral and irrational and emotional beings who commit acts of emotional and reflexive behaviors. The solution, I find, is a cohesive body that we can democratically support its institutions to determine the regulations of our economy as well as our legal system. And with that, I think the state justifies itself over anarchism. I see the rest of my time.
All right. We'll
If
give
you
it
want to
over
move over to Fabian. We're
Yep.
going to say Fabian. Say Fabian. This
Fabian.
one.
I appreciate it.
Fabian.
Okay, so I want to start by listing off some names here. Hopefully, maybe you'll figure out what's going on once these names start popping up. George Reed, Gunning Bedford Jr., John Dickinson, Richard Bassett, Jacob Broom, James McHenry, Daniel St. Thomas Jennifer, Daniel Carroll, John Blair, James Madison, William Blount, Richard Dobbs Spate, Hugh Williamson, John Rutledge, Charles Coatsworthy Charles Pickney, Pierce Butler, William Few, Abraham Baldwin, Thomas Jefferson, John Langdon, Nicholas Gilman, Nathaniel Gorham, Rufus King, William Samuel Johnson, Roger Sherman, Alexander Hamilton, William Livingston, David Beerley, William Peterson, Jonathan Dayton, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Mifflin, Robert Morris, George Clymer, Thomas Fitzsimmons, Gerald Ingleson, James Wilson, Governor Morris. These individuals got together with the supposed consent of the people, but it was a very small minority of people that wanted to sign these documents, to send off these documents. And what were they discussing when they began to meet together? Well, they were discussing going up against King George III. They were discussing the Sugar Act of 1764, the Currency Act of the same year, the Quartering Act of 1765, and the Stamp Act of 1765. These men got together, and with the help of some other great men that are often unjustly deified today, but often definitely memorialized and thought of as great men, they got together and they started the Revolutionary War. Now, if the Revolutionary War is a just war for the freedom of men against an oppressive tyranny because of these 4 acts that I'm describing, and you look at the current state of affairs of states today, you'll notice that, well, the current state of affairs is far, far worse. I have so many more grievances against the United States of America being one of the greatest nations in terms of freedom and economic mobility and et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure they may bring up some issues with, my opposition may bring up some issues with those. But I think it's important to understand that this is one of the greatest nations. And despite that, I have far more grievances. So if you believe that if the Revolutionary War was right, and that we had the right to fight against the largest empire that the world had ever known, then you agree that we should have the right to start killing politicians and soldiers and police officers whenever we see fit. Fortunately, anarchists are not that violent, especially of the right-wing variety. Instead, we choose to negotiate. We choose to debate. We choose to try and change the culture because we believe that you cannot force the ideals of freedom on man through the violence of a weapon. Unlike the state that thinks that they can't do that, and unlike my opponents that think that they can do that. We can look at the history of states throughout the world, World War I, World War II, the rape of Nanking, Unit 731, where they dragged Chinese women out of their home and locked them up and gave them frostbite and poured boiling water over their hands so that they could deteriorate and crack and they could die from this. These are only a small list of the atrocities that states have done. We could look at the Gallic Wars. We could look throughout all of history. And what we find is that states are always gaining in their power and are always built upon theft, robbery, and slavery, and usually large amounts of murder. Now, people say, well, when you say slavery, you're being hyperbolic, aren't you? Because the idea of slavery, it invokes, especially in an American audience here, it invokes this idea of, working in a cotton plantation and being whipped in the back if you didn't succeed enough, having literally no freedoms whatsoever. And I will agree that some slavery is better than other forms of slavery. It is better to be a middle-class wage worker, having the state prostitute your body and your labor by stealing all of your property, or at least a portion of your property, so that it can legitimize its own use of force against you and create the laws that you may or may not support, that you must abide by. But I would also say this, to the image that you have invoked of your mind of a black man sitting in the fields or picking cotton under the horrible, horrible institution of slavery under the state, understand that they too saw better slaves. They saw the house Negroes. And I would say and finish by simply saying this: I would rather be a free man than a house Negro. And with that, I'm done.
Okay, Luder, you want to finish it off?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Thank you. Yeah, so I would just start by saying that a state is preferable to anarchy for multiple reasons. One, it acts as a neutral third party in order to uphold rights. It ensures the safety and security of its citizens. It provides public education, and it meets the inelastic demands of society, such as critical infrastructure through taxation.
I had to
The
look up
relationship
TOS to
between
see if
the
I could
state
say House
and its
Negro. Well,
citizens
you
is
can.
upheld by the social contract, where the citizens of the state sacrifice a portion of their freedom and act within the rules and regulations of the state in exchange for the state acting in the best interest of its citizens. Without a state and this social contract, society would descend into chaos. In an anarchist society, specifically an anarcho-capitalist society, since we're having a discussion of the two ANCAPs here tonight, morality, as well as rights, will be determined by the market. Your access to your rights is determined by how much capital you have. If you cannot afford to pay for the protection of your rights, then they effectively do not exist. As a statist, I firmly believe that access to your rights, as well as the institutions of government, should not
From
be determined
tweets
by
from
capital,
Twitch.
as one of the primary functions of a state is to provide and secure basic rights for everyone regardless of your income status. Under an anarcho-capitalist system, there are no institutions which guarantee your rights free of charge, because the market dictates your access to rights. Fabian and Robin here have both advocated in the past for freedom of association, which is an outright rejection of the beliefs of the Civil Rights Act, and enables individuals to discriminate on the basis of race. The distinction is clear. I want to live in a society where my rights are guaranteed free of charge. I can participate in the functions of government free of charge. I can send my future children to school to receive a high-quality education free of charge. And I can live in a society where people are not allowed to discriminate against each other on the basis of immutable characteristics. A state guarantees these, and an anarcho-capitalist society does not. In closing, anarcho-capitalism is entirely rooted in philosophy, but at some point we need to engage with reality and ditch the rhetoric. So I would challenge either Scott or Robin to provide a proof of concept for their political philosophy. And with that, I'll yield the rest of my time.
Okay.
All right, guys.
Hang on real quick. I just want to say for everybody who's in, make sure that you like and you subscribe. I guess we're supposed to say that more. I'm trying to say it more right, the call to action or whatever the fuck they call it. We're going to start with the ANCAP side. We're going to open the floor up with them. You guys, we're in the cross-examination portion. It'll last roughly an hour and a half. The floor is open. Fabian, if you want to start, go ahead.
Yeah, so the first thing I want to make very, very clear is that if you want to learn about anarcho-capitalism, you can follow me on twitch.tv/Fabian Liberty. That's not what this debate is, and that's not the confines of this debate. This debate is about anarchism versus statism. I know that you as a socialist have a different view of statism as well, right? And so we can attack socialism here and you can attack capitalism and we can have that debate. And if you'd like to schedule that debate, you should absolutely talk to somebody and I'd be willing to have that debate. But that's not the debate tonight. And the reason that's not the debate tonight is because you thought that your primary audience would find it better to attack anarcho-capitalism and not engage with anything that we're going to say about anarchism. So I'm simply going to pivot off of your bullshit assertions against anarcho-capitalism and talk about anarchism. You asked us. I would like you to show us a stable society based upon your principles. And being that the debate is about anarchism versus statism, I would say simply this. We can look at the Icelandic Tane system that lasted hundreds of years and was a relatively anarchist society with private property. We can look at the Iga Sukuku Iki, which is hilariously where the actual ninjas were. And we can look at the Council of Elders that they had representing their society. We can look at the Republic of Kospaya from 1440 to 1826 and the relative success that they had in their anarchist society. And if you want a modern day example, we can look at Chiron, Mexico, a population of 18,000 that is indigenismo, anarcho-mutualist, anarcho-environmentalist, that is doing so well that they've tripled their income and wealth after rejecting the Mexican state, that they've planted 3,000 hectares of forest, and they haven't had a major crime since 2015. And so I will finish by simply asking you this question. Can you provide me, throughout all of human history, a nation state that has existed, and I don't mean nation state from the Westphalian perspective, you could give me an empire or something, a nation state that has existed that has not been founded upon robbery and slavery?
The floor is open, gentlemen.
Yeah.
One of you can take...
Ludo, you're muted if you were talking. I wasn't paying attention. But basically, I guess I think it's important to address here what Scott said there right off the jump. There are societies that aren't founded around, these ridiculous notions of what you think slavery might be in terms of
Can you name one?
All right.
Name one.
Yeah, okay. So you look at that flag at the wall over there, Yugoslavia. I don't think that's founded on a similar what your notion of slavery is. You have to define slavery for us first.
Well, taxation is a form of slavery.
Okay. Well, I think taxation is a good thing. So if you want me to justify taxation, we can go down that line.
So do you want me to explain why it's
go ahead and
defined
justify
as slavery?
You can go ahead and.
Pardon?
Do you want me to explain why taxation is a form of slavery?
Yeah, I mean, just understand that to me it already sounds like off the jump you're virtue signaling about how taxation is slavery, and it just sounds like to me that you're trying to evoke an emotional reaction from the audience.
Yeah, I'm very passionate about not being enslaved. I am.
Oh, okay, Scott. I just figured I'd point that out because, you know, I think every sane person in the audience tonight
you're trying to poison the water by saying that we're trying to play to people's feelings when we're trying to stake a position that we're actually having.
Yeah, so you're passionate about it, but that doesn't mean you're trying to appeal to the emotions of the audience off the jump already. I'm just calling it out for what it is.
Taxation is.
Lucas, I'm just calling it out for what it is because what you're doing here is you're trying to evoke an emotional response from this audience.
Yeah, it's almost like I mean,
everyone
first of all,
here is smart enough to realize that.
Dylan,
it's almost as if people should have. It's almost as if people should have an emotional reaction to slavery. Yes, that's why we're using slavery.
Okay, so now let's go down your line of why taxation is.
There we go. Okay,
let's
cool.
Okay, cool. Let's hear this.
Yeah. So, do you own?
I'm ready.
We'll try and make it simple, right? Like, there's a lot of theoretical books about it and all that stuff, right? But we'll just try and make it simple. Do you have a right to yourself? Do you have the right to your body?
Sure.
Okay. And so, by virtue of that, do you have a right to your labor that you do? Do you own your labor?
Yeah.
Okay. So what is taxation if not an involuntary form of theft from the right to your labor, which directly comes from the right to your own body and what you do with your body? It is that simple.
Okay.
It is slavery.
So I sell my labor in exchange for a monetary incentive.
Is it voluntary?
Can
you choose not to pay taxes?
No, I voluntarily I enjoy the liberties granted to me by paying taxes, like a government.
You're dodging the question.
Did you consent into it? Did you consent to paying taxes?
Okay, not initially, but tell you what, I'll consent to paying taxes. I already did it. There, right there. I'm consenting to paying taxes.
Okay, you did. That's awesome. That's voluntary on your regard. I didn't. I do so under duress because I have no choice.
Dylan, are you even allowed to consent?
Yes.
Well, then there you go. By virtue of saying that you consent, you already state that you own yourself and you own your labor and that you have a right to consent. Therefore, anybody that is not consenting and has their taxes taken away has been enslaved.
So do you consent to living in the United States of America then, Scott?
No, I don't consent to it. There's nowhere else for me to go.
Why not just pack up and move if you don't like it so much?
Name a country and then no. Real quick. I already gave you this question, which you've yet to answer, which is name a state throughout the entirety of human history that has existed that is not founded upon slavery and theft, and in most cases, murder. Name one, and I'll move there.
Okay, I mean, the thing is don't you have the anarchist republics that you are already glorified in your opening statement? Why not
There's
move to one of those, Scott?
Tehran and Mexico, yeah. So would you consider moving to Tehran instead of living in the United States? If you believe that you are in a state of slavery right now living in the U.S.?
If I had the ability to convince the mother of my kids to bring my kids with me, I totally would do it. Like if she would be willing to do it, but unfortunately, I don't think she's going to do it.
Sounds like she enslaves you, man. I'm kidding. So
fuck out of here, Andrew.
A lot of these are diving into non sequiturs, and we're getting way out into the arena of nothingness. Why don't you move to Afghanistan? Why don't you move over here? I don't care about any of that. I want the subject brought back in to what the hell we're talking about. Now, the reason he's brought up taxes, I completely understand it. If we can narrow back in so that we can have the conversation move forward, that would be great.
Yeah, okay, so fine. I'll simply address it like this. By living in the United States of America and not moving, he consents to abiding by America's tax code as part of the social contract. Simple as that.
Where's the social contract?
So do you believe that you have to sign a contract within every interaction you make with people in order for it to be considered consent?
That's what
That's you can shake a hand.
No.
But that's not what a Rousseau or English social
you agree
contract
that there
is.
are forms of consent which exist which do not require you to sign a contract.
Two
correct?
parties agree and state the
parties
affirmative.
Yeah, two parties.
I've
agree.
never
Yeah, so
agreed or stated the affirmative.
You agree by choosing to live in America.
When?
Right now.
Wait, do you think?
I know you're from Cuba, right? So you moved to America. You live in America.
When I was 14, I didn't consent.
I mean,
Okay, so
you obviously don't want to go back to Cuba. Cuba's worse.
I was gonna say, like, would you like to move back to Cuba, Lucas?
No, fuck no. That's an even worse state. That's an even worse.
You still live in America today, correct?
Like I said before, there are different types of
How is that
slavery,
relevant to
and I
whether it's
said
slavery?
I would rather be a
consent
free
to living
man
in
than a
America.
house
It's lovely,
Negro.
isn't it?
No, I didn't.
Just because other slaves have it worse doesn't mean that you are not a slave.
So then,
Right.
Scott, once again, or Lucas, as a matter of fact, why don't you move to Tehran, Mexico, since you are not bound by your
I have a
children
question.
and
Why is the
ex-wife?
wait? Would you say the same thing to a woman that's being raped? Should she have to be the one to move, or should the aggressor stop raping her?
Yeah, so the difference between a situation like that and why it's disanalogous is I've already provided you a reason as to why you're consenting to live in the United States of America today.
So the woman exists within the place that she's being raped. Does she have to move in order to be the for the
Wait,
state?
so Lucas, so
for the
you
rape?
think that
It's
living in a
completely
country is
analogous.
so you think that living in a country which you voluntarily
And being
live in,
stolen?
you chose to live in,
Why are you
so
sneaking
you
in?
live in-
Where I'm questioning. Wait, no, I'm
No,
questioning
Lucas,
the
you live in
voluntary
America
part.
today, correct?
Okay,
One at
a
a
woman
time,
lives
guys.
in
Hey,
America.
enough. One at a time. Go ahead, Lucas. You can respond to what he's saying, make your point, but give him a chance before you cut him off. When he starts for 6 seconds and you jump in, nobody can fucking hear what's going on. So we'll start with you. Go ahead.
Okay, it is perfectly analogous. Let's say that there was a state that one of the rules of the state is that it's okay to rape women. Your argument is that it is on the woman to move away from that state, because if she stays within that location, she is consenting to being raped, and I say that she's not.
That's absolutely disanalogous. I'm talking
How?
about the country you consented
How?
to live within today. Wait, so you
How?
consented to live within
How did
the
I
country.
consent?
Lucas, you've been
confines-
warned. I've already warned you twice.
Yeah,
Let him finish
as
his answer before you cut in. I counted 2 seconds before you chimed in. Let him finish his answer. Go ahead, Dylan.
As difficult as it is for you to refrain from speaking while I'm talking, just please bear with me here for a minute. So what I'm saying to you is there's countries, right, like America, which you voluntarily agree to live in.
Yeah, Lucas does have to
understanding the
chill out a
tax
little
code,
bit.
understanding the structure of the government you live in, understanding your right to participate in it, and rights which are granted to you by the government, and the rights that you have to participate in the selection process of who leads that country. By doing so,
I'm sorry.
and participating, by voting, by paying your taxes, by being a member of society, you consent to the rules of that governance.
Hey, Dylan, I have a question. How do you feel about 17-year-olds' ability to take hormone replacement therapy? Just curious.
It's a very strange question, Scott, but I don't think they should be able to.
Okay,
Is that
I'm
our
just
topic
curious.
of the debate tonight?
Well, no,
Yeah.
no, it's a line of argumentation.
Dylan,
It's a line of
sorry, I
argumentation,
was-
right? So,
Confused.
so
Yeah,
for
Dylan
example,
still didn't answer my
It
question.
doesn't make much sense. I
What
did
if-
answer your question.
so-
I offered you a reason.
Chill out.
It may not
Stop.
It may not yet be a non sequitur. Let him tie it in. If he's making some type of analogy, that's totally appropriate, so he can explore your logic. Go ahead, Fabian.
yeah. So let's say, because that is already the law in Florida, right? That is now the law in Florida. That hormone replacement therapy as well as puberty blockers are illegal in the state of Florida, right? But let's just say Florida, let's say Ron DeSantis, who I'm sure you love so much, right? Because he's a wonderfully democratically elected leader. Let's say he makes hormone replacement therapy for everyone and gender reassignment surgery for everyone illegal in the state of Florida. Would your response be that every person that immediately gets their hormone replacement therapy cut off and gets their surgeries canceled, well, they consented to it because they pay taxes and they vote, and they just lost the vote, and losing the vote is just a form of consent? What if that became the law of the land of the United States of America under socialized healthcare? The Republicans come in and say that gender reassignment surgery and hormone replacement therapy is illegal and no one is allowed to do it. Would you just simply say, well, then why don't you just move? It sounds, I mean, I don't know how you feel about trans rights. I'm just curious. Are you for getting rid of trans rights?
Well, see, Scott, the beauty of my system is that all of the members of a certain community have the right to participate within my system, within my state, where they are allowed to make decisions.
Can you answer the question?
They're allowed to choose their leaders. I am answering your question, Scott, if you just let me finish. Thank you. So basically, what I'm actually proposing to you is the fact that you are going to be subject, and this is a descriptive fact of reality, you are going to be subject to the will of a majority of people around you. No matter how descriptive, no matter how much you deny it, there is an absolute power imbalance that comes from the majority, right? So when you have a group of people who are essentially brigading against you in your existence, whether that's social scrutiny or whatever, and of course legal scrutiny, that's just how it's going to manifest and materialize into reality. As a group, we have a way of determining what's moral and what's not moral. And more often than not, which there are statistics that show this, but as a general trend and a rule of thumb, democratic decisions usually lead to better outcomes.
So would you like to answer the question? Because that was a very long not answering of the question.
It
Did
wasn't an answer
trans
to your
people consent by engaging in the electoral process and by voting and by paying their taxes to having their rights to HRT and gender reassignment surgery taken away? Are you saying that they are consenting members by virtue of the fact that they live in the United States of America? And that is what I'm asking. Is that a form of consent?
Yes.
Okay, so you say that all rights can be taken away so long as the majority wins. We find that to be morally evil. And we find you to be morally evil.
Yeah, so I think that's bad for other reasons as well. But at least within my system, we have an implementation of these rights as believed and agreed upon by the majority of people. So
yeah, anarchism has that too.
And you absolutely do not, Scott. You have a society in which the holders of a majority of capital get to choose at their whim and their behest to control
why are you talking about anarcho-capitalism?
This is about anarchism versus statism.
Why are you talking about anarcho-capitalism? This is anarchism.
Well,
versus
now,
statism,
hang on.
Anarcho-capitalism.
This conversation wasn't brought here by Dylan. It was circled into this. So you can't say it's not fair for him to bring up this point when he brought up something that was what would normally be considered non-analogous, but was able to tie it into his position. Dylan can finish. Go ahead, Dylan.
Yeah, no, basically, I only brought it to that point because my understanding of your ideology is that this is the preferential system for which you agreed to, right? Like, I think...
Obviously not, because your framing is not. So, but continue.
Well, if you'd like to describe to me how it's...
I can take over here for a second.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
I think that what we're talking about, right? Like, the way that you're framing this conversation where it's entirely centered around the United States, I think it's fair that if you're talking about the system that we live in as it exists right now and how it applies liberalism and democracy, the values that we hold, I think it's fair that if you guys are going to poke holes in our arguments, and there are criticisms of democracy, absolutely, but I think that if we're having this conversation about our ideal systems, it is perfectly valid for us to bring up anarcho-capitalism, which is your ideal system, and try to address that, right?
Yeah, so if you have a question about anarcho-capitalism, like, you can go ahead and ask it. You say it's analogous. I think it's a little disingenuous, but that's fine. So you said that my system is that whoever has the most capital has the means and the rights, and that those don't. Am I mischaracterizing what you're attempting to say? Maybe you could repeat it.
Yeah, no. So descriptively speaking, people who control the wealth have the authority over the people around them, especially in your system when it comes to things like, I've heard you speak of this in the past, both of you, about, for example, private arbitration and rights enforcement agencies.
Okay, so first thing's important, right? Because this is, I think, an interesting thing because, and I'll tie it back to the debate topic, right? I advocate for anarchism first. Under anarcho-capitalism is the preferred system in which the community that I would like to live under. But that does not mean that I want to impose anarcho-capitalism on anyone. What I want to impose, if you will, which I don't actually, what I want to do is I want to wake people up and have societies re-evolve. I want people to have all forms of anarchism. That is why I'm an anarchist. I am not simply an anarcho-capitalist and only an anarcho-capitalist. But if you choose to live under anarcho-capitalism, it is not simply the people with all of the money have all of this power to do what they want, and the poor people are fucked in this regard. First and foremost, it is moral because they are all voluntary. This gets into the idea of a monopoly on power and violence, right? But if you so choose to live in a covenant community and you want to live in something that has what you might call a state, but actually has a government that is fully voluntary, that is perfectly fine. This is something known as voluntarism, right? So the idea that you say that like, oh, you have to do things this way under your system, yeah, that's the preferred place that I would move to. But that doesn't mean that covenant communities can't exist, for example, that have many of the same functions and capacities that a state does. The distinction between a government and a state is what's really important here, because a government is just a system of collectively organizing in such a way that people can manage the property, manage the areas, manage the people, et cetera, et cetera. You can have democracy under anarcho-capitalism. You'd live in an area, you would sign a contract, you would move to an area, you could have a system of governance, you could have votes in elections where people lose, you could have public property, you can have all of those things. The important distinction here is that the land is not stolen, it is not taken through force and violence, and that everyone that lives there voluntarily, and they have the right to divest from that system and move to another covenant community, another anarchist society, or under anarcho-capitalism. Under the current state of affairs, we don't have that. We have nation states.
Right. So what I would ask you, Scott, right, is that earlier you were talking about this notion that states effectively, like, the entire globe is run by states or exists under a state apparatus to some extent.
With relatively few exceptions, yes.
With relatively few exceptions, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that every state that exists has been founded on the ideas of like bribery and like robbery and like slavery and all these things that you would consider to be immoral, correct?
Yes.
Right. And would you agree that if you were to participate in these institutions or in these systems by virtue of like voting or even like engage in these institutions at all, would you consider that to be immoral?
Yes, I think voting is immoral. Yes. Unless you're voting to reduce the power and scope and size of the purview of the state, thus reducing things, right? Like, so harm reduction here, or unless you are doing a protest vote. I don't think it's an issue to go to the poll and, let's say, write in Cthulhu so that people know the population are pissed, but like there's nothing immoral about doing that, right? Like you're just doing a protest vote.
But you would still say that, like, voting in and of itself, you are like affirming the legitimacy of the institution in and of itself.
I don't feel like I'm affirming the legitimacy of the institution if I'm voting for Cthulhu. No.
The position.
I can explain to you why I'm asking you this, right?
Yeah, another thing is, Scott, is I really wanted to quickly touch on the fact that...
Dylan, stop. Yeah, let Luder finish what he was saying.
So... If you were to go to the United States, right, and
thanks, Lovecraft
the United States to form your anarchist society,
and AOE Cozy,
would you consider that to be legitimate or no? Because this land was stolen.
Yeah, much of this land was stolen. Absolutely, yeah.
So if somebody else steals the land and then sells it to you, that's okay. That's moral to you?
No, so we've actually had this debate because there's kind of two methodologies here, right? So there's the Hoppian and the Rothbardian from an anarcho-capitalist position, right? From other anarchist positions, one might simply say that all the land was stolen, you should give it back to the people, especially like, syndicalism might use various forms of unions to recollectivize to the workers the property in such a means as engaging in an eventual path, most likely towards anarcho-communism.
Right. So what is your position on this? Not Hobbes. What is your position on this matter?
Okay, yeah. So my position is that we will eventually have to deal with the fact that much of the land was stolen. If we can find the original people that own the land and have a right to the land, that they need to be immersed in some way in disentangling the property, right? Because obviously we believe in transformational labor, right? So if land was stolen, but then I put a house on it, right? Then there's an issue because I own my labor in putting the house on the land, but then the other people own the land before. And so the idea is that we would have to come up with some sort of system as we reduce the power and scope of the state and make reparations in some regard to people whose land has been stolen in figuring out how we can create one private property owner, or so that those people can come together and be dual property owners in some regard. It is a difficult thing to do, but it is the only moral thing to do. It is the only ethical thing to do. When you steal from someone, you have to find a way to fix that problem.
But if you consider taxation to be theft and immoral and slavery, and you want to use the state apparatus to achieve like reparations, how are you not?
I never said that.
State apparatus. We don't want to use the state apparatus.
You were speaking about shrinking the size of the state, and then while you're shrinking the size of the state, enacting like reparations in order to legitimize the land so that you
We
can then
never said it would be done through the state.
Okay,
You
but he
mentioned
did say
the
he was
state, so I
enacting
will let you-
reparations as well.
Yeah, I would let you
Yeah,
clarify
but that doesn't
Are we
mean-
using the state for this
Yeah.
process at all?
No.
No.
Okay, so then how are we getting the land back and enacting
Sure.
reparations? through private business?
Can I answer this, Scott?
Yeah, go ahead.
So let's say I have somehow I managed to create that have proof that I was the original landowner of a certain area within the United States, and there's a person now
Fishmole.
that has a house within that area. Now, as the original landowner of this land, right, the first person that homesteaded this, or a descendant of one of the people that homesteaded that area specifically, right, I can take this person to arbitration, and then we can find a third-party resolution for the conflict that we have, which is I own the land and he owns the house with on top of the land. So we would try to find some middle ground for us to land between. And with that, I also want to address something, Luther, that you mentioned within your opening statement. You said that we need a third party neutral arbitrator to solve the conflicts of society. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a neutral party that we cede power to that functions as the state. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, well, I don't think it functions as a state. I don't like the fact that you're sneaking in that at the end. But we agree with you that we need a third-party resolution system. I don't like the idea that you think that we need to have a monopoly on conflict resolution. The problem that we create with having a monopoly on conflict resolution is that the monopolists, the people that have the monopoly on conflict resolution, then they have the power to start conflict, and then they can use this conflict that they created, and they will solve themselves because they have a monopoly on solving conflict. They can use this conflict that they initiated themselves to settle the conflict in their favor. And that is one of the ways that the state perverts and destroys justice, by using their power and monopoly that they have to create conflict and settle the conflict in their favor.
Yeah, so Lucas, let me retort against it. Am I going to go through with this?
I got you. So
right.
The thing is, Lucas, right, is that it's really important that when we mediate conflict, we need to have this neutral party that we cede authority to handle conflict resolution, right? Because when you have it run through these like private avenues or private channels, without any of them having a significant monopoly on violence or force, they're not going to be able to actually enforce this. So the question that I would ask you, Lucas, or even to you, Fabian Liberty Scott, is that if we have an individual who lives across the street from a school, and every day when school gets out, this individual goes to their front yard and exposes themselves to children, the parents of the children have the obvious response of like, what the fuck are you doing? You can't expose yourself to my kids. And the individual on his lawn says, I'm on my private property. I have the right to do this. And also it's backed by this rights enforcement agency, which I've hired. And the parents of the children say, this is fucked up. You can't expose yourself to my kids, but they can't afford a rights enforcement agency. Then how do you resolve this situation in anarcho-capitalism?
Yeah, real quick. I'm gonna respond because this is towards me. Obviously, Luther watched the debate between myself and Big Papa Fascist because apparently he can't come up with his own arguments for statism. He has to use someone else's.
You didn't give an answer to it. That's why
I gave a very complex answer, and if you simply watch that debate, watch more of the Crucible's content, right? And go back and give them some additional views. You will hear my long-winded answer into that, where we go back and forth multiple times on this. Now, if you would like me to reiterate some of those points to a degree, we can reiterate that here. I think it's kind of sad and fucking pathetic that you decided to use someone else's argumentation. Yeah. But yeah, sure. Again, so I'm not going to deal with your reframing of it because you reframed it with a bunch of lies inherent in the question, right? You don't simply say, oh, I have this rights enforcement agency and they said it okay. That is not how a market works, but I understand you're a socialist, so you don't understand economics. But the idea here, right? The idea here was multiple different ways that we would fix this. Number one, I had a question about why there are not fences. Number two, I had a question about why a school is directly next to a residential neighborhood. Number three, we have situations in contracts that can be done to eliminate this issue in the beginning, and it is up to the school and it is a responsibility of the school to be able to make sure that they're not putting kids right next to random ass houses next to each other. Most schools today under zoning are not done that way anyways for for a whole host of reasons, because you don't want houses directly next to schools. It's not a good idea. So there are multiple points of failure that lead up to the situation that you're describing between contracts and what people have done. Multiple levels of failure. Assuming all of those levels of failure have existed, number one, it is far more likely that we would be living in a covenant community that actually would have some systems of laws. But let's say it is a purely anarcho-capitalist community where not everyone has agreed to the rules and laws of a covenant community, which you yourself might consider another level of failure. So we're dealing with this tiny minority of situation. In that response, both people do have rights enforcement agencies. Both people would likely go to arbitration. If an arbitrating firm is simply taking money from people, then then the conflict is not resolved. If the conflict is not resolved and is an ongoing issue and it cannot be settled with court, it's eventually going to have to be settled by violence. That's what humans are, a violent species. You can't magically think away the violence. And so if some dude keeps whacking his fucking dick in front of my children and somehow manages through some legal mumbo jumbo to get around all of the systems of failure that have occurred, at a certain point, it becomes my responsibility of a father to beat the shit out of this guy. And I'd have every right to do so if he continued the violent behavior and there was no restitution in the way that he was doing it and all of these points of failure. I'd like to point out that we could just simply look at the Rotherham report in the UK and understand that men had their 15-year-old daughter's hands nailed to a table while the police showed up, because they refused to show up because of this, even though they were Skyping video to the father, and he showed up to try and get his daughter, who was being sex trafficked, back, and the police arrested him because they were afraid of being compared to being racists. You can read the Rotherham report. There's all kinds of instances where the state fails. So bringing up multiple levels of failure of someone else's argument that you couldn't make yourself is disingenuous as fuck, and that is the end of my response, because these horrible things can happen in any society, and we will do the best we can to prevent those things without violating people's rights and without creating immoral, evil systems like the one that you want to create.
Okay, that was a lot. There was a lot there to hash out.
Yeah,
So
I'll let it sit back and ruminate on that. But I had to finish the whole thing because this was like a 20-minute conversation on another debate topic that he was trying to sneak in.
Luder, do you mind if I start just briefly?
I would just like to respond very quickly to what Scott said, and I'll hand it over to you. So I think that we can recognize that both institutions versus anarcho-capitalism or statism can have failures at different levels. The thing is that when we're talking about a state, there are more systems and checks and balances in place to prevent that failure from taking place, as opposed to anarcho-capitalism. Now, the two things that I want to notice is the fact that you're criticizing me for using a similar argument to somebody else when you spent the first 10 to 15 minutes of this conversation citing philosophers and recycling their arguments. On the second hand, I don't think that my position is very disingenuous at all. It's a perfectly legitimate question. And the thing that I would also like to add is that when you began to respond to what I was saying, Scott, you listed multiple different failures, like they could have put up a fence. They should have put the school somewhere else. They shouldn't let this house be there. I think my answer to that is just, first and foremost, we shouldn't allow people in our society to expose themselves to children. That should be illegal, and we should use violence to stop that from taking place.
Yeah, I already said that I would use violence given all of those multiple institutions of failure. You're trying to reframe it in a disingenuous way, and I don't like your bad faith argumentation here. And lastly, I'll simply say this. Since I was quoting philosophers and I didn't have any ideas of my own, I'd like you to find an anarchist or ANCAP philosopher that came up with what I will now dub the House Negro argument. That one was all me, baby. I had to look up TOS just to make sure I could. So you're full of shit and you know it.
Yeah, but I mean, we have to quote our
disingenuous. The Holy Trinity right there. Go ahead, Dylan.
Yeah, I just figured, I mean, if we're citing philosophers, I have to cite the great philosopher Andrew Wilson, of course, right? Like, I couldn't not. So another thing I wanted to address with your line of argumentation there, Scott, is...
Thanks, Dylan. I appreciate that.
The great philosopher Andrew Wilson.
Such a bootlicker. Such a bootlicker.
Well, he's a status. Of course he's a bootlicker.
Exactly. Peep the flag. All right, so basically what I wanted to get down on this, since we're going down this line of dialogue, Scott, is specifically within the pretext of Luder's argument, which I think it's a very, very reasonable expectation that someone might not be able to afford a service on a market which costs money directly out of their pocket since it's not accounted for on their behalf. like a rights enforcement agency, which of course, Scott, I only took this down this rabbit hole because me being the dumb statist that I am, I'm looking for help from the anarchists to help me understand their specific, ideology, the most preferential implementation of how they want society to be ran. Because what we're doing here is we're contrasting our systems. I'm contrasting my system, founded on ideas like liberal equality, democracy, to your ideas of anarchy, right? I think that's very reasonable.
Do you want me to answer that question about the poor? Or do you have a different one?
Let me finish.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just let me finish really quickly. So basically, you have the guy, right? He does have a rights enforcement agency. Luder prefaced his hypothetical with that, which is very plausible. He has a right enforcement agency. However, the parents of the children do not. Now, like you addressed, Scott, you can just go beat the shit out of the guy, right? Because you have the onus upon you to stop your children from being harassed by this guy. I agree with you. I think that's just personally a very reasonable expectation. But what I'm saying to you now is this guy's rights enforcement agency is now able to, act upon their willpower and do what they can to you who might not have a rights enforcement agency because you're unable to afford it, allowing this guy to get away with, again, exposing himself to children, which is immoral.
Yeah. So I know Lucas wants to jump in on this, but I'll be real quick since it was addressed to me. So first of all, look at the legal system today. There's many different legal systems, but most of them are horrendously corrupt in favor of the wealthy. Right? I mean, like we have tax evasion systems. We have a legal system where, lawyers, are better representing the wealthy in our current system. And there may be some better systems, right? And if you choose a better system and you like a better system, you should probably move to a form of anarchism that's more to your liking since you're an anti-capitalist. But pro bono already exists in our current legal system. If you make under a certain amount of money, there are tons of websites and resources for individuals to get legal representation under our current system. I don't know why you think that this wouldn't exist for something as simple as a rights enforcement agency. It's also the fact, in your analogy, since we're going to continue with your analogy, you're exposing yourself to children outside of a school. How is this school existing? How many people are at the school? How many people are damaged parties in this? Do none of them have rights enforcement agencies? Why are people not walking around? It's the same thing as, why are you driving a car without car insurance? Does it happen sometimes? Absolutely. Are people too poor to get car insurance sometimes? Absolutely. The answer is that it is immoral to steal and to make prostitutes of us all so that we can create systems that are supposed to be made in our favor with other people's money. That being said, it is your personal responsibility to get a rights enforcement agency. But I don't think the situation you're describing would in any way, shape, or form actually exist.
Do you believe that it's immoral to steal a penny to save the world, Scott?
Do I believe that it's immoral to steal a penny?
To steal a penny to save the world, yeah.
Absolutely.
Why?
Because it's immoral to steal.
This is actually something that I addressed within my initial argument, right? I said the defendants of the state, they pretend like they're advocating for stealing a rifle to stop a horrible tragedy from happening. No, you're not for that. You're advocating for creating a system that not only encourages this, but completely allows it. It allows for people to steal, murder, and enslave their fellow men. You're not advocating for rare occasions where we need to steal a penny for somebody to, save the rest of the world. No, you're advocating for stealing millions and billions of dollars and killing people and putting people in jail for the simple thing of smoking weed. Those are the kind of things that you, the statist, are defending. If you don't want to defend any of that, maybe you should stop being a statist and become a
can I reframe your question real quick?
Hang on. You got Fabian. Just real quick, guys. Real quick, across the board. So he made a point, Fabian. We're going to let the other side go ahead and counter his point or discuss his point with him. Yeah, you guys have had a lot of time back and forth between Dylan and Fabian, and even Luder and Fabian. Let's see if we can't get Lucas in here. And see if we can't mix this up a little more. Go ahead.
Whenever you get an opportunity, I just want to rephrase his question.
They're oppressing your speech, Lucas. Go forward. Fight.
I'd like to address Lucas's dialogue there. Within my system, we have the preferable alternative to yours of democratically participating despite how much capital you own, despite your influence, and we can reform because we treat men equally, we treat people equally, and we're able to address the corruptions in our system. That is what we're trying to do. You can talk about individual policy with us if you'd like. I personally don't find smoking weed and going to prison for it as a very desirable outcome. But at least within my system, I can find a way to reform my way out of that, to operate within my state. I'm advocating for these institutions to exist to prevent outcomes like the previously mentioned exposed man, and then people to not have rights at birth. Because what you've advocated for here thus far is a system where people have to pay to have rights. Do you understand how ludicrous that is?
That's not what we were saying. That's a straw man. But I
it's
want to
absolutely
actually
not a straw man, Lucas.
Wait, let him interact, Dylan.
Go, Dylan.
Okay. So I think you guys, and I'm glad I'm here because I want to point this out, because I feel like a lot of the people that defend the state pretend like, oh, if we have a state, people are not going to be able to jerk off in their property, right? That is not true. If somebody is in the border of Mexico and I am in the border of the United States, a person in the border of Mexico can jerk off in front of their house, and if I'm in the border of the United States, I don't have any power to do that. So you haven't solved that problem either. You're pretending like you have, but you haven't solved that problem either. The only way for you to solve that is for the United States, the whole state of the United States, now has to declare war on Mexico. That is not different from when Scott said, I'll just beat the shit out of the guy because he's masturbating in front of kids. So pretending like you solved that's disingenuous, and it's just simply a lie. You haven't solved that problem either. You're just lying.
I think that's ridiculous to state that, because you understand that governments negotiate with each other in accordance to their legal systems all the time.
I agree.
They are the institutions.
People negotiate with each other too.
Lucas, I'm not done. Lucas, I'm trying to express to you that the state, being the institution,
yeah, I know, Casimir. I'm going to bring it back up again.
Is able to express its will and its interest to other entities with their respective monopoly on force on the region. That's how states work in counteracting each other and their power. That's how they represent the interest of their people. I don't think that's outlandish to say, and I think that there's other reforms we can make so that guy in Mexico who might be doing that on his property is still going to be, held accountable for his actions if a citizen of another country happens to view it.
So you do know that if the state of Mexico doesn't impose anything on him, the United States has no authority to put him in prison for jerking off, right? Only the state of Mexico has authority to do that, right?
Well, so the thing I'm trying to get at here is we need to lay out some more specific...
Is that true or not? Is that true or not? Can you please answer my question? You didn't answer my question. You keep doing non-answers. You didn't let me finish after literally 10 seconds of dialogue. So what I'm trying to understand here is there is a crime in which a person indecently exposed themselves to another person, a resident of the United States of America. A crime has taken place. It's not a crime. It's not a crime in Mexico.
It's not a crime in Mexico.
Wait, are you saying that it's not a crime?
No, it's a hypothetical, Dylan. It's a hypothetical. Do you not know how hypotheticals work? Do I need to explain to you how hypotheticals work?
You were saying that it's not a crime in Mexico to expose yourself to
No,
children.
I'm saying I'm saying let's say that indecent exposure wasn't a crime in Mexico, and there's a person in the border of Mexico that they're naked in their property, right? In the border of Mexico, right? And then you're in the border of the United States. How do you solve that problem? Because the United States, your monopoly on violence, doesn't have any authority over the men in Mexico, does it?
So what I'm going to say to you there is that my United States government, with a monopoly on violence, has its abilities to negotiate with the government of Mexico, understanding that there was a crime.
Individuals have that.
Wait, no, Lucas. Understand it like this. If a Canadian citizen, say there's a country where a Canadian citizen gets murdered and they're traveling, because we do have things like borders and laws that apply within these borders. And
yeah, no, it's fine, Corvette. I'm gonna use your original analogy, which was what I was going to say.
Canadian, the Canadian government comes to represent their interests legally. I'm sorry, this is ridiculous that you just don't understand that.
I actually understand that. And you literally have just discovered how right enforcement agencies work. There is one party, right, that has a third party that defends their rights, right? Now there exists within the property of another party that has I knew he was going to fall for it. That defends their rights. Now, the person that's visiting
I
the
knew
property
he was gonna
of
fall
the property
for it.
owner, right? Now, this person has his right enforcement agency, which in your case, let's say it was called
I was
the
hoping
United
he would
States,
set up the trap.
Enforcement Agency, right? And then there is the Canadian Enforcement Agency, right? Now, these two enforcement agencies can come together and negotiate on a conflict resolution. What you're advocating for is forcing people to pay for this right enforcement agency. We're saying that it's not okay to force people to fund this right enforcement agency, and that we must let people choose who is going to enforce their rights.
Yeah, so Lucas, you have a system that's entirely founded on ideas of consent. And what if I just simply choose not to consent to being interrogated by your rights enforcement agency? Are they going to then come and shoot me because I don't agree to those terms? And if so, will I not be punished for inflicting harm on you?
If you have inflicted harm on somebody, there's nothing wrong with somebody making you pay for your crime. That is not what we're talking about. You're talking about defending the initial crime. That's what you're advocating for. Being okay with theft from the beginning. How is that relevant?
Well, so I actually have a question for you, Lucas. So it kind of sounds like you're framing this in a way where,
Can you please let him answer?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to answer that question, Lucas. My issue with that is your system, comparatively to mine, has the notion that people have to pay to have their rights upheld as well, which means people will not get their representation. And that I wanted to address this earlier as well, because Scott said this and I felt like it needed to be addressed. Do you understand the huge, massive disadvantage people get in search of looking for free law and free lawyers, pro bono cases? They're put on wait lists. They have to wait an extended period of time. They might not get a lawyer before their trial date. You have a system which is incredibly inefficient, where people who are at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum are just expected to not have rights. It sounds ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree. The U.S. is like that.
Yes. My system allows me to reform it. Yours does not.
No, it doesn't. Your system literally has it right now.
Does.
Yeah,
You're using the state.
Hey, Looter. I think I've waited long enough. I just wanted to reframe your question.
I wanted to address that. The thing is in my system, there's a democratic process which allows me to choose my representative officials, and then they're able to implement policy based on my interest, based around the fact that I am the one who's able to cede power to them, and then choose that they're able to be in the governing body of my constituency.
Yeah, so
what
let me
you have is
two
people
things.
who are just unable to afford. I want to reform America so that people are able to have access to lawyers, so people are able to economically thrive.
Yeah, me too.
Me too.
So the way you want
Hang on, Dylan.
They just keep saying me too.
Yeah, but you've got to wrap it up at some point so that these guys can respond. It's a good spot for a super chat. Third Rail with Omar says anarchists want to return to the days of hunter-gathering. Vest government, U.S. Constitution, monopoly of violence by the state only. You guys don't have
for the record, he's right. Those are called anarcho-primitivists. I disagree with them. Anyways, so two things. Yeah, anarcho-primitivism. Anyways, so
hunter-gatherers. Wrap up my point really quickly. I'll wrap it up.
Which point would you like to wrap up?
Yeah, okay, so the thing that I'm trying to wrap up here is essentially in my system, your society is dictated by who has the capital control it, at least within mine, and then I can reform it further by having a democracy which allows me to pick and choose the politicians that write the laws.
Okay, so here we go. So first thing I wanted to do, I waited quite a while. I just want Looter to bite a bullet really quick. He asked me, would I steal a penny to save the world? But he didn't ask me, would I do it? Right? He didn't ask whether or not it was justified. He said, is it immoral? Is it wrong to steal a penny to save the world? And I said, obviously, because theft is immoral. So Looter, I just want to know, is it moral to gang rape a woman to death to save the world?
Is it moral to gang rape a woman to save the world?
Gang rape a woman to death. Is that a moral action?
I would say that it's a wrong action for sure. But I think that if we're talking about saving the world, I mean, would you let the world be destroyed because of this? Would you let the world just magically implode?
Right. In fact, so it would be. So your answer is it would be justifiable.
Just to be clear,
but it is still immoral.
My answer to this, Scott, to be clear, is that I would actually allow myself to be gang raped in order to save the world.
There you go. There you go.
The position that I hold, right, when it comes to value.
For the record, there's no consent.
The Chad altruist.
Yeah. I appreciate your sacrifice, but in this instance, there's no consent. We have to gang rape someone to death without their consent to save the world.
So when we're talking about preferable
consequences... Hey, Dylan, is your name Looter?
It is now, Scott. He's muted.
No,
so
no,
I'm
it's
gonna
not.
answer his question.
No,
You tried to trip me up. I'm just answer the
Hang on,
question.
Enough.
Is it a 2v2?
Dylan, hang on. Dylan, chill out. Let them finish their conversation. Go ahead.
Can you go ahead and reframe your question, Scott, or re-ask?
No, I'm actually just framing the question the exact same way that you framed it to me. I just chose something that people are more uncomfortable saying is a moral evil. Some people might be comfortable with stealing a penny because they don't think it's that big of a deal, but I would say that theft is wrong no matter what. So I'm just reframing it to something that people are less comfortable with, which is gang raping a woman to death in order to save the entire world. Is it a moral action to gang rape a woman to death to save the entire world?
Oh,
Is she
immoral.
ugly? Is she an ugly woman?
That's not what's important.
She's smoking hot if it makes you feel better.
That's not what's important. That's not what's important. So what I would say to you is that it's still immoral to gang rape somebody, right? But it would be morally justifiable to do so given the circumstances. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think
right.
that same
Which is what I
control
said. Which
would
is what
be
I
my
said.
threshold. Yeah.
All right,
for
cool.
sure.
So I just wanted you to know that.
Yeah,
The other
saving
thing-
world
so-
is the threshold, Scott. I don't think that's an absurd claim to make.
Right. I was just saying that we have the exact same answer to the question. So anyways, that you thought you were tripping me up on and trying to like reframe. So I just wanted to make sure that the argumentation was solid. So I know you guys are for a system like Rotherham and police state and all of this stuff, but what you were talking about was you said, well, I get a vote in my system, right, Dylan? You were saying at least with a vote in my system, I have the ability to influence the and statistically speaking, that influence is the march onward to progress, right? That the state gets better and better. It's a very Marcusean argument that eventually, the state will become this perfect entity that, via the means of democracy and conflict resolution and argumentation, that will eventually reach like the perfect or close to perfect state, like the God state, right?
I don't know if that's particularly a correct framing of my argument, but carry on.
Okay, but anyways, so the thing here is, right, is the issue is it doesn't matter to me whether or not I lose a vote, whether or not a king decrees, or whether or not a tyrant decrees, or whether or not an unelected official in the executive branch of the government tells me that I have to do something against my will. It doesn't matter. I'm now being forced to do something against my will, something that I did not voluntarily choose to be a part of. It doesn't matter how it's done. Tyranny of the majority may lead to better conclusions sometimes statistically from a kind of like consequentialist calculus. But the fact of the matter is that they are all wrong and they are all moral evils to force with the threat of violence other people to do these things. Now, you're saying, well, under your system, capitalism and the accumulation of capital is somehow going to create a system where only those that have the large amounts of capital. And it's very interesting because I think your system, and it's very, of course, you're coming after anarcho-capitalism, and you've been avoiding the debate entirely, which is anarchism, this entire time because you're an anti-capitalist and you think you have good arguments against it. But the problem here is a basic misunderstanding of economic theory, where you believe by virtue of the argumentation that you're making, or you're just not logically consistent, you believe that there's one piece of pie. And that when people gain more and more wealth, that they're hoarding resources and commodities. But the fact of the matter is that's not how it works. The system that we're proposing is one where everyone is prosperous, where an overwhelming majority of people, so long as they choose to go out and work, have the ability to afford these systems, where there will obviously be mutual aid and praxis from people in order to afford them rights enforcement agencies if they don't have these things. Instead, you're scared of that. You're scared of the individual responsibility that is required under anarchism. You're scared of the fact that men will actually be free and that you'll have to actually have that individual responsibility. Instead, you want to use violence to force other people who disagree with you to do the shit that you want to do. And I say that's evil, and it makes you evil.
Okay, so Scott, after your moral grandstanding there, I think it's appropriate that
I am morally grandstanding over your evil.
Yeah, okay. Well, I believe that I'm not evil. That's a contention we'll take up right now. I just want to address the fact that I counter with the fact that I think that you're evil because your system doesn't assure rights for people. Your system allows No, it doesn't. It absolutely does not. The only right you assure people is freedom. You don't assure people the ability to have rights because you think that the market is just going to create ends where people can hire rights enforcement agencies and things like that. Another thing, Scott, I'd like to address is the fact that being the dumb status I am, which I mentioned previously, I'm trying to figure out your preferential system of anarchism so I can come at it in the best way that I can. This is the argument we're having here. We're arguing about which system is preferable. Right now, I'm arguing for a democratically instituted state with Enlightenment liberal values. You're advocating for anarchism.
You're such a liar. You're a socialist. We all know you're a socialist. You're using
you
liberal
don't think I
democracies.
believe-
You're using liberal democracies as a fucking shield, and then you're denying me the ability to argue the actual fucking topic, which is anarchism in general. You're never going to be a fucking ANCAP. You're an anti-capitalist. You'd probably be far more comfortable in ANCOM or ANSOC or anarcho-syndicalist or anarcho-mutualist economy. But the problem is that you're trying to attack with your regular rhetoric that you've developed that is anti-capitalist my system because you can't actually defend statism versus anarchism.
I'm
Stop
trying
lying.
to attack the best version of your system that you have to offer me, Scott. I'm trying to be charitable.
best-
to you.
All right. Well, hey, you know what, guys? He
Anarchism
said the
is
best version
anarchism.
the best version of anarchism is anarcho-capitalism. You know what? We've changed him from a socialist into
And
an
you know what?
ardent
I'm saying
capitalist,
all
and I
anarchism-
appreciate
If
it.
that's your pivot away, Scott, if that's like your pivot away from the fact that I'm trying to understand your system and then attack it logically because I'm attacking the fact that you have a system that doesn't uphold people's rights, that allows poor people to get thrown under the bus by the fact that they can't afford rights enforcement agency and just expect them to have pro bono work
there's
done to
a-
them. No, if you want to make this an argument about economics, we can. I'm trying to understand the loopholes that function within your system. I'm arguing from a liberal democratic standpoint. I've always held Enlightenment liberal values like equality under law, right to the pursuit of happiness. You know, Lucas, you can keep laughing, but I don't think you have enough conscience or ability to understand what I'm saying and address it instead of doing anything else but laughing. So I'm trying
Dylan,
to
what's the
attack your
flag
point.
behind you? What's the flag behind you? It's Yugoslavia, right? You're advocating for socialism. Stop,
Yeah, I
stop
like
LARPing
socialism.
like a fucking.
You know,
I
they have
want
enlightenment
liberal
liberal
democracy.
values there. You know, they
If
have
you believe in
enlightenment liberal
democracy,
values there in
hey,
democracy,
hey.
right?
If you
Yeah,
believe in
life,
democracy,
liberty,
then
and
you're not
property.
against
That's what we
socialism,
believe
you know?
in. Yeah, we also believe in the right of life, liberty, and property. Those are the Enlightenment values that the United States was supposed to be funded on. No socialism.
Yeah, enlightenment liberal values also encompass equality under law, right to the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, we won that.
It's like-
That's why we won the non-aggression principle,
want
because we don't
equality.
believe that there's nothing special about the people within the state that gives them the right to steal from me. They don't have any right to do that. That's why we want equality under the law, where you want to create a group of people that have the exception of the law, and they have the right to kill, steal, and murder their fellow men.
So you want a system where everyone's entitled to the same amount of rights,
Yes.
I want
by
equality
people
under
not
the
being
law.
able to have any rights because they're poor.
Nobody
So,
said
see,
that.
what you're
You
doing
keep reframing and lying
what-
about that.
What you're doing is something that, I mean, Frederick Bastiat said that the socialists do it, but in this case are the statists that are doing it, okay? Socialists like to pretend, in this case the statists, they like to pretend that because we don't want the state to do something, we don't want this to happen. Like, for example, if I said, I don't want the state to run education, you'll pretend that we don't want any education. That is not the case. Just because we don't want to force people into paying for something, it doesn't mean that we don't want this to happen. We want this to happen, and we want people to choose what they want, and we want to allow people to freely associate and choose what they want. That is what we want. We want freedom, equality under the law, and the right of life, liberty, and property to be respected, not to be violated by a third party that you think it's somehow made out of special clay. Different words.
Yeah, so the reason I'm attacking this position, Lucas, is due to the fact that you might want these things, but your system has no way of materializing these ambitions other than through your ideas of consent.
Okay, wait.
Can we return? You know what? I'll
Here's the
return
thing.
to a question again. No, I feel like this is a pertinent question, right? So, just real quick. I gave you the Iga Sukuku Iki. I gave you the Icelandic Tane system. I gave you the Republic of Cospaya. And I gave you the city in Mexico, Chiron. And I said, please just give me one nation state that is not founded upon theft from people, that is non-voluntary, and burglary, and more often than not, murder. You've yet to be able to answer that. You said Yugoslavia. And then I said, and we went down a rabbit hole of taxation is theft. And you are willing to admit that taxation is a form of theft. And you're willing, but it's okay because we need it in order to protect our society and safety.
Yeah,
So
I'm
the thing
fine
is,
with justified.
So the thing is that we can
It's
recognize
justified
and
theft.
acknowledge.
All right.
we can recognize and acknowledge the wrongs that have occurred throughout history for sure, absolutely. But I think the thing that's important here is that while we cannot provide an example of a state that was not founded upon these means, you have not been able to provide a methodology or a means by which you could achieve your anarchist society through a means which you would consider to be moral.
We
And the problem
literally
here,
just gave 3 examples.
Republic of
so
Cospire
the example-
and Icelandic
listen,
Tane and the
example
Eagles
that you
Sukukuiki.
gave- Right. but
And
the thing
Chiron,
is,
Mexico.
when you're
No,
talking
not
about Chiron, Mexico, even if you want to use that example, Lucas, the thing is that Mexico as a country, you would believe, would be stolen land. And this land, first of all, Chiron, Mexico isn't even anarchist. It falls under the federal jurisdiction in Mexico. They pay taxes. They're still subject to the rule of law in Mexico. So it's not anarchist. There's no reason to use that as an example in an anarchist discussion, right? The thing is, but the thing that we have to recognize is that a state in and of itself is not immoral. We have to recognize that people that function within systems can take
I disagree.
immoral actions. And what we have to do when we're talking about our ideal system and what we want is that we need to have a system that places limitations on people to take immoral actions. And I believe that in my system, when we're talking about democracy through a state, that is going to impose more systems of checks and balances and limitations for people so that they won't take immoral actions, versus your ideal anarcho-capitalist society, which I feel like has less limitations for people to take immoral actions.
Luder, who's the third-party arbitrator between the citizen and the state?
You don't have one. Well, actually,
So wait, but don't we need a third-party arbitrator for everything? Why don't we have one between the citizen, one citizen, and the biggest, largest institution in the country? Why don't we have a third-party arbitration between them?
Because that third party wouldn't have the authority to actually enforce anything.
Got it. And that is the problem with the state.
That's the problem.
Right, but the thing is that even under your system,
That there is no
you're
the
talking
problem
about-
is that is the problem, Luder, that there is no third party arbitration between the biggest right violation agency in the United States, which is the state. Is the one that perpetrates the highest amount of theft, is the one that perpetrates the highest amount of liberty violations, is the one that perpetrates the highest amounts of killing, is the one that perpetrated the bombing of Hiroshima, Nagasaki. The United States is the government in the state, my bad, is the biggest institution that perpetrates all of these things that you're trying to prevent, and there's no way to mediate conflict resolution between the citizenry and the state.
I just want to address a quick lie real quick. Chiron, Mexico does not pay federal taxes. The only taxes that Chiron, Mexico pays is when transporting their concrete blocks and their resin that they export through Mexico's territory.
I have a source which would demonstrate otherwise, but that's fine. So one thing that I want to mention to you, Lucas, is that in a scenario, so let's say, for example, that you live in your covenant community and I'm born into your covenant community and I'm a child or I'm a teenager in your covenant community, would I still be subject to the laws and regulations of your rights enforcement agency? Even though I didn't
that is okay if this is irrelevant because you're not addressing my point. My point is that the United States. Wait, no, it's not.
Relevant. I can explain to you why.
Can I tell you why it's not relevant?
Can you not interrupt him, Lucas?
Why it's not relevant. He asked me a question. I'm trying to tell you him why it's not relevant, but he's not going to let me.
Now, can you try and attack his question, though? Luder's asking a question. Please address it.
Yeah, I mean, I will say why it's not relevant because I'm saying that the institution of the state from the beginning was funded and created on the theft, murder, and it's just institutionalized slavery of people. That is why it's not relevant to compare the covenant community of somebody that homesteaded and rightfully acquired the land to the state. It's not the same. It's completely disanalogous to use a gang and a mafia compared to somebody that just has land that just acquire land from nature. It's not the same. That's disanalogous.
I think it's incredibly analogous and relevant to this conversation, and I'll explain to you why.
You think it's analogous? Okay, go on.
I'm going to try to explain it to you, yeah, Lucas, if I may. So the thing is that when we're talking about, even if I was to grant you that your community and how it exists is perfectly legitimate by your ideal standards, it's perfectly legitimate and valid, right? Even if somebody was born into this community,
yeah,
even
I'll
if they
answer
didn't
when
sign
he's
a
done.
contract, they would still be bound to enact in a way which is within like the rules and frameworks of your covenant community, correct?
Yep.
Even though they didn't sign a contract.
So no, hold on. So hold on, Lucas. So I can actually answer this question.
Scott, I want Lucas to.
Scott, come on. This was supposed to be a question addressed to Lucas.
Well, I mean, he does. Okay, go ahead.
I want Lucas to answer the question. Yeah.
Right. So you know that I have an answer to the question.
Dylan had an answer to the question that you gave earlier, and you wouldn't let him provide it,
You
so I'm
didn't
just
want
doing
me
the
to
same
answer.
thing. If that's how you want to outline this debate, I'm perfectly fine going down that road. Lucas, go ahead.
Well, first and foremost, just so you guys know, in a team debate, it's team. It doesn't matter who answers, who does not answer. You're on the same team. It's not appropriate for you to request that only one member of the opposite team can only answer your question. The appropriate thing is to allow the team to answer as the team would. That's what they are. Go ahead.
All right. So just real quick, you're talking about a minor in this situation, right? Someone born that hasn't signed the contract.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
So when you're dealing with a minor, they absolutely have rights unto themselves. So this is kind of the idea of a covenant community, is not that the state is granting you rights, right? And so this is an important, I think, philosophical breakaway that we have to get into. Obviously you watched the debate between Andrew and I, right? So you already know this. And so your question is disingenuous because you already know the answer to this. But of course, right, you have natural law. That is an objective ethic that we derive those rights from, right? And so the idea being that if you have the right to your body and you have the right to consent and you have the right to transformational labor, you have a right to freedom of movement. These are objective ethics that we believe. You can disagree with them, and I understand that, but and that's okay if you disagree with them. And there's even some disagreement within the anarchist community. But the idea is that you have those rights. They're not granted to you by the state. Instead, those rights exist by virtue of logic or possibly by virtue of divine law or some other form of objective ethic, right? So the understanding here is that while you are a minor, your parents are a custodian of your rights. Your parents are a guardian of your rights. And that means that you do not have the full capacity to consent to everything. Just like a 2-year-old can't consent to sex. I don't think you're for that, right? A 2-year-old also can't consent to living in the covenant community and following all of the laws that they have. It is the parent's responsibility when they have a child and they are a custodian of those rights to sign that contract on behalf of them. And then once the child comes of age, whatever is determined in that society to be the coming of age, and we determine that they are fully conscious and capable of making a contractual obligation themselves, they will then have a situation just like you have with dual citizenship, right? Where it's like, hey, look, you're 18, you got to pick. Are you a German or are you an American? Are you an American or are you English, right? You renounce your citizenship to one country. Same thing. You are a part of a covenant community and you either choose to remain to live there and you choose to sign that contract, or you are a guest there. And if you are a guest there, you are not necessarily afforded all of the rights of that contract. And they also have a right to eject you if you are a guest there and you don't follow their rules or do what it is that they want. It's very simple.
I disagree. I don't think that you have to sign a contract to be afforded rights. I just reject that notion.
No one literally said that, and you're just reframing and lying about what I'm saying, or you're not smart enough to get it to get it either from an entire debate we had before and what I just said. The state does not grant you rights. A contract does not grant you rights. A rights enforcement agency does not grant you rights. The rights enforcement agency protects your rights. A covenant community is a contractual obligation that people do so that it's easier to protect their rights. You have your rights by virtue of...
Yeah. Are they just subjective and exist out there in the ether? Is that
yes.
where rights come from? Okay.
Yes, you have certain rights.
So if we're talking about like a covenant community,
almost you might say inalienable rights.
If I can finish. So if we're talking about like a covenant community which has the right to vote, they make this the decision where everybody in our society has the right to vote, and it's a democracy. And this isn't a natural right that you would hold, right? So
well, then it wouldn't be a right. It wouldn't be a right.
It wouldn't be a right. You just wouldn't call it a right.
Yeah, it's not a right to vote.
It's a privilege.
It's a privilege granted by the contract that you signed. It's not a right.
So let's say, for example, that if somebody who didn't live in your covenant community was to then come into your covenant community and break a law, like a minor infraction, like trespassing, for example, would they be afforded a right to due process under your system or no?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So due process,
but it wouldn't be a right.
It wouldn't be a right. Why is it a privilege instead of a right to you?
Because you don't have the right to other people's labor.
What does this have to do with labor?
Because if someone is given due process, right? And that means that they have equal representation throughout this, right? Is that what we're saying, right? Like you have a right to an arbitrating firm. You have that right. That's what you're saying, correct?
Yeah.
Right? People are working in the arbitrating firm. They are engaging in labor. You don't have a right to other people's labor. You don't. If you did, that would make them slaves. You don't have a right to other people's labor.
I don't think they would make you a slave. So my question.
So you think forcing somebody to work for you doesn't make them a slave?
You're not forcing somebody to work for you.
Yes, you are.
You work for a private arbitration company voluntarily, which says that people who cannot afford service will work for you pro bono. That's what you laid out earlier.
I never said that. I said that people will likely do that.
Not slavery.
Because it's consensual. Pro bono requires consent.
They consented to.
Oh man. So what I want to ask you, Scott, is why do you value freedom as like an absolute? You value absolute freedom over all else?
Do I value absolute freedom over all else? I value life over all else. I value
rights.
Well, okay. Yeah. So I think
you value freedom as absolute right. That like you have the right.
Life, liberty, and property.
Why can't
life
you just
first.
I did.
Freedom?
Liberty second.
I answered it.
Third.
I said I believe.
Okay,
I believe in life first.
Can I frame this in a way that I think we're trying to get this across? Why is freedom a moral axiom to you? How is freedom self-evident? I believe that's the more appropriate framing of that question.
Because I believe in free will. You may not believe in free will. You may be a hard determinist, but I believe that I have free will. And by taking away my free will, you are taking away the right to my own body. It is the core of who I am as an identity, as a consciousness, as a being, is who I am and what I do with my body and with my mind. Right? So if I am restricted in my ability to act freely, then that is the core tenet of going against my own being as a person. Right? Now, there are different ways of restricting my freedom. Obviously, beating the shit out of me is worse than, let's say, maybe a 5% tax.
I agree with you, Scott.
There's a hierarchy here, right? I'm not a moral absolutionist, but freedom, right, is the core to my identity as a conscious creature, as a moral actor. If I'm forced to act in certain ways, then my ability to be a moral actor is reduced. If my ability to be a moral actor is reduced, then I am forced or coerced into immorality, which goes against ethics in and of itself. So freedom is the only way to ensure that I am not forced into situations that require a breakdown of ethics themselves. So that is why it is the highest value. But I would still say life is a higher value for me personally.
All right. I understand that. So I guess what it really comes down to here is we're talking about ways to uphold rights to enact the most freedom, you'd say. Like to have the most agency over ourselves to a degree.
You're talking about positive and negative rights. This is a difference in philosophy for us.
So you don't believe in positive and negative freedoms?
No.
Why is that?
There's only one type of right, and then that is your right to self-ownership.
Mm-hmm. And everything that derives from that.
Yep. So, Dylan, what you're getting at is one of the core different values that us anarchists and people like you guys have differentiated, right? Is that there's three options, right? There is option number one, I own myself and I am the one that has the last say in what I do with my body and my life, right?
I appreciate the
Then
follows,
there's the
boys.
Second option, I own partially myself.
Where are you all
and
at?
a group of people kind of have a
If
right
you consent.
to tell me what to do and
Tell everybody where you're from
me.
if
And
you're
then
in
there's
chat.
a full, scale.
Just like part of the
enslavement
world.
that
You don't
is
got to be
the
like
third party owns
address.
me and tells me what to do. We take the position, right, that I am the sole and the only one that has the right to say what I do with my body, as long as I'm not aggressing and violating somebody else's self-ownership. You are saying that I don't really own myself, that it is okay for a third party to violate my self-autonomy, right? My autonomy, violate that, enslave me, take away my labor, or whatever justification you feel at the moment the state is doing. That is what you guys are advocating for. As long as people democratically elected it, that is okay.
Yeah, so basically my understanding here is that you guys basically said that self-ownership is your only right, correct?
Yes.
So if you have the
rights come from self-ownership, yes.
So if you have the agency to do something like the aforementioned expose yourself to children example, you have the right to do so, especially if there's nothing in your way to stop you. I personally am a believer.
You don't have the right to infringe on others' rights.
No. You're on your own private property. You're exposing yourself, but you're doing it within the confines of your own property. You're not touching them.
You're psychologically damaging children. Do you think it's okay to expose yourself to children?
I absolutely don't, and that's why I'd want to.
So then you already agree that you're damaging their rights.
Yeah. So Scott, it sounds like to me that you just don't care enough about those rights then, because I want a state to be able to enforce. I want a state.
You want the state violates.
So Lucas,
I literally advocated for parents beating the shit out of that guy. Please don't misrepresent me and lie.
I think that's okay as well, Scott. But then we laid out a hypothetical for you where the parent is not able to afford the rights enforcement agency, and you expect them to just give them pro bono work for free, or you expect people to put up fences or God knows what else. Instead of me being able to rely on an institution I know has my back to make sure that this person is psychologically.
Why are you lying about what I'm saying? Please don't lie about what I said.
Okay, so how did I lie about what you said? Because that sounds exactly like what you said.
It's not. You said that I expect.
You said it was up to personal responsibility to put up a fence, to not have a school in a residential area, so kids wouldn't get exposed to.
Okay, so I know you're feigning emotion here because you're misframing and you know that you're lying. But anyways,
well, Scott, if you're passionate, I'm passionate about kids not getting shown cocks by random dudes.
So we explained it. We explained it, and you're pretending like that didn't happen. I'm not the one that was hanging out in Queen Alexa server. All right. Anyways, so what I'm saying here is that.
That was a low blow, dude.
You're goddamn right it was.
They got the evidence on that.
I know, I hooked you up with them.
You fucker, dude. That was a low blow.
Is this the Crucible or not? Is this the Crucible or not?
It is
It's blood sports, all right, boy?
Yeah.
I mean, come on and talk a little shit.
Well, because of what Dylan did, the truth came out. That's what I'll say about that.
Anyway, go ahead.
I'm just fucking with you. I know Dylan and Looter were both on here showing the DM, or not the DMs, but the audio. Right. Anyways, here's the fact of the matter is both of us are against the situation you're describing, right? What you're talking about is what are the prescriptions we will do to fix this from happening, right? And you're trying to reframe this in such a way to say that your system is more efficient at protecting children and that it is okay to violate people's rights from a consequentialist calculus because you're saying that your system is more likely to protect people. And so it's okay to sacrifice your liberty and sacrifice your rights and to make slaves and prostitutes of us all.
Yeah, now, Scott, just to knock it down and make it nice and brief, yes, I think it is a good thing that we have an institution which we all cede power to. And that way, when some guy goes and shows his wanger to a bunch of little kids, he gets penalized for it.
Right, and exactly. So what we said is a majority of these would be under...
1 second, Scott.
1 second? All right, let's go.
Really
he hadn't finished. Scott hadn't finished, Dylan.
Yeah, and I didn't finish it either. So what I'm going to say to that is, Scott, you, like I said earlier, you go and beat the shit out of that guy. Totally understandable. Totally reasonable. Cool guy. Cool guy you are, Scott, okay? Now, what I'm saying to you, that guy's got a rights enforcement agency, and you don't. My system upholds your right to not have your child exposed to.
Why not?
Lucas, have you ever heard of this? Why not? There's this radical thing that exists in the real world called poor people. I'm talking about reality here, right? There's going to be poor people in Anarchism, especially people who aren't able to be supported.
No. Let me engage. Let me engage because you went on. Hold on. You went on. He went on this.
You want to engage, Scott, after all this time now.
And I'm trying to finish.
Well, no, because you're forcing, because you won't stop lying about me. No, you had a long-winded answer. I gave an answer. You have another one, right? Again, I have to miscorrect all of your misinformation and your gaslighting here.
So how you materialize your ideas.
So, anyways,
let him respond, Dylan. Let him
right.
respond.
So the problem here is that you're saying, well, my system is so much more efficient at that, and then I pointed out that. Well, no, it's not. There's no perfect system. And Rotherham, UK is a great example of how the state intentionally protected child molesters and sex trafficking for a long time, from the 1970s all the way up until, guess what? News is breaking. It's still fucking happening today. Okay? So for 50 fucking years, we've been protecting child molesters and rapists under the power and the purview of the state. What I am saying is that yes, bad people do bad things. No system fixes this, okay? What I am saying is that doesn't justify you being bad yourself and violating other people's rights. Now, when you bring up all of these other issues and points of failure, we gave up tons of examples of why this is an uncommon occurrence, not likely to be true, and all of the different systems that could alleviate these problems. But the core of the argument here is that bad people do bad things, but that does not justify you engaging in theft from other people, okay? You don't necessarily get to say that I'm allowed to steal from people and violate people's rights because hypothetically my system is better at protecting people than your system. It's bullshit.
Yeah, Scott.
Now, before you respond, I'm sorry, guys. I just want to point out the submit your questions sign there. What always happens is we put this up, nobody puts in their questions, and we get to the Q&A and you flood us with them, right? Don't do that. Just put your actual damn questions in the chat now so that we can get them recorded, okay, ladies and gentlemen? We would appreciate it. We're moving into the 13-minute mark here, and then we're going to get into closing statements.
Yeah,
so
Big Papa Fascist, not the greatest debater, but
we're going to start.
He's a good moderator.
With the Dylan Luter side, and allow them to respond to some of these various points that have been made. Go ahead, Dylan. Sorry for cutting you off.
But really quick, when this timer is off, the questions are cut off. So submit them now. It's now or never.
I'm gonna run to the bathroom real quick, Dylan. Go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. So basically, what I'm going to need you to rephrase that a little bit, Scott. I kind of lost my train of thought there, but
yeah, just in summation, to be very quick, bad people do bad things. Your argument is that it is okay to steal from people and to create slaves of us all in the exchange that your system is hypothetically better. And you're trying to bring up a very specific instance in which I point out there's multiple levels of failure. Why are they not in a covenant community? Why do they not have a contract with the school? Why is the school directly next to a residential area without like some fucking woods in between them? Do all of the parents in the school not have the ability to mount any form of rights enforcement agency? Why are these children not protected by the school? Why do the parents not engage in a rights enforcement agency? Why, like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to explain why your system, the thing that you're saying that's supposed to happen is an incredibly rare thing. You're creating a hypothetical and saying, see, this is how your system fails. And I'm simply coming back with the Rotherham report and saying, hey, look, states have problems too. Your argument that is this hypothetical with multiple levels of failure is not actually an argument against my system.
Yeah, but in my system, I offered you a solution that materialized itself in the real world. But beside that, I wanted to address the fact.
What did it materialize in England?
Let him. Come on, dude.
You're not addressing that.
Let him.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So.
Okay. Let him dodge the question and just handle it in your outro.
I'll address that in a minute if you'd like me to. You're gonna have to state it again later. But basically, what I'm trying to say to you, Scott, is that because of the fact that my system is able to penalize people, and like you said earlier, there's a hierarchy to more moral wrongs than others, I think it's in all of our best interests that we're able to jail the rapists and child molesters of the bunch.
Yeah, we agree, and our system has that too.
We agree.
But your system has failures that ensure that not every child's right to be infringed upon or attacked or abused is not protected, because you expect people to either pay for that kind of thing or sign up for a covenant community, especially when you yourself said that children are not able to see that kind of thing.
Rotherham report. So does your system. Or if you prefer America, I don't have a great example for Canada because let's be honest, we all know Canada doesn't matter, right? Just kidding. But if you prefer the U.S., I don't know, the founders documents. Go check out the FBI founders documents where the FBI comes in and steps in to save CIA assets of children that are being sex trafficked, right? There's bad things in the world happen and your system isn't perfect. And you're using this idea that our system has all of these failures and that there's no protection, there's no guarantee, while refusing to engage with the fact that so does your system. The difference is that your system is immoral by definition and ours isn't.
Yeah, so Scott, what I'm trying to say here is that my system has ways of being realized and materialized into reality to find a way to address the problems. Your system hasn't even had populations of people over like 300,000. Our system works on a mass scale. Our system upholds people's rights.
I love it. That's the new goalpost. Now it has to be 300,000.
We're moving
way
the
that you
goalposts
address it.
precisely.
No, because we can't talk about your system in practice and materializing, because you talk about subtle failures that materialize in ours, which we can seek to address through the democratic process.
Wait, subtle
through
failures?
the group pressures. Pardon?
I wouldn't
Subtle
consider Rotherham a
failures?
subtle failure, but I get what you're saying.
Comparatively to a country in which over 300 million people live, it's kind of subtle. Whereas we're talking about small anarchist communities, because that's the
Well,
way
hey,
they
only 80
materialize
million
and
people
exist,
live in the UK, and Rotherham's not the only town, my friend. And it's only been happening for 50 years.
Yeah. Okay. So the beauty of my state,
Just
as I
50
was trying to say, the beauty of my state is that through public outcry, people, regardless of wealth, financial status, are able to address these problems and get them resolved through the democratic process.
Dude, look, we get that you don't like private property and capitalism. That's why the debate is anarchism versus statism. Dude, I totally think you should go find an anarcho-syndicalist community and go join it and get in a good co-op and go against the powers and the abuses of the state. They have democratically run processes and all of those things. Your argument is against a subset of anarchism, which is our ideology, and you consistently are reframing it. You're consistently reframing to this idea that wealth exists, therefore there's a balance of power, therefore your system bad. And we've engaged in tons of ways of explaining how that's not true, and you keep restating it like we don't have arguments against it. So stop with the bad faith bullshit, please, and actually engage in argument.
I'm trying to
Let's give them the floor. Let's give them the floor for a minute, guys. The ANCAP side. Let's give the other side the floor for just a few minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So I think that when we're talking about addressing a problem such as people exposing themselves to children, we're talking about how do we actually remedy this problem in society. I just believe that my system and our beliefs are superior to yours for the fact that if my solution in the hypothetical that I laid out isn't to just build a fence around this person's house, or it isn't just to expect the parent of the child to go try to ask for somebody to donate charity and their time to work pro bono. That's not the expectation that I have to remedy this problem. The expectation that I have is that I'm going to have the state to be able to go up to this individual and say, hey, you're not allowed to expose yourself to kids, and arrest them and put them through the process, right? That's the distinction right there. You expect people to just, you provided every single solution possible, such as building a fence, or just not having a residential community next to your school. You provided all of these solutions besides the one that I advocate for, which is we should have a state that just prevents somebody from exposing themselves to children in the first place.
So go live in a covenant community. That's anarcho-capitalist. Problem solved.
So a state is anarcho-capitalist? Is that what you're saying? Me living under a state?
No, there's a difference between a state and a government. Go live in a covenant community.
Go live in a covenant community.
Yeah. So the concern that I had, that I wanted to bring up, is that it seems like when you're in your covenant community, it serves all of the same functions of a state and a government. It's just that you sign a contract and you just want to do rhetorical backflips to say, well, it's not technically a state and it's not technically a government. Am I understanding you correctly?
One is voluntary.
It
doesn't serve all of the same functions of a state. It could be a minarchist system. Hell, it could look a lot like a state, but so long as it is voluntary, everyone does those things and they're not violating people's rights and they have freedom of movement and association. There's no issue of natural law here.
But you've already agreed. You've already agreed, though, Scott and Lucas, that if somebody exists within that covenant community, but they haven't signed the contract yet, the laws of that community would still apply to them, correct?
No, that's not what I said. I said that,
minors.
Well, yes, if you are a guest in the community, yes.
Yes. So even if you haven't signed a contract, the laws of this community still apply to you.
You're on their private property. You're on their private property.
Yes.
But I will say,
you have to follow the rules of the property owner.
Right, and if you live in a state, you have to follow the rules of the state.
The state is not a property owner. The state is a criminal. The state is a criminal organization that has.
Okay, so you're a covenant community.
Here you go.
No, let me answer this.
No, it's real quick. Real quick. If you go to your buddy's house, you're invited to your buddy's house. You are a guest at his house, right? And he goes to the bathroom, and you're in the living room, and you're like, you know what? I really want to whip out my dick and take a piss on his couch. I'm going to go ahead and whip out my dick and take a piss on his couch. I just really hate white couches, and I think it'd be hilarious. This would be a hilarious prank. Now, you have not violated any law in America. It is not illegal to damage someone's property when you are a guest in their home and they said that you could come in their home. Now, there may be some legal remedy in some places, but let's assume that that's not particularly illegal. The guy comes out of his bathroom and says, "Hey, dude, did you just piss on my fucking couch?" And then you go, "Yeah, dude, it's funny, right? Great prank." And then he goes, "Get the fuck out of my land. Get the fuck out of my house." That is what we were talking about. We were talking about the fact that you are in a covenant community that is private property and you are a guest there. And while you are a guest on private property, you must follow those rules. It's that simple.
So you would say, Scott, that even though you haven't signed a contract with us within this community, or like even your buddy's house, when you go to your buddy's house, you haven't signed a contract saying that you're going to abide by his laws and regulations or rules or whatever he has for his house. But you would say that between you and your buddy, there is this like unspoken social contract where you're not going to piss on your friend's couch, right?
I mean, you can reframe the Rousseauian fucking social contract in that way, but it's no longer a social contract at that point.
That's effectively what it is, correct?
No, it's not.
No,
it's not.
You're not going to piss on your friend's couch, even
No,
though you
it's
haven't
not.
made it out or signed a contract.
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
Why not? Can you explain it?
Because he's the private property owner. He can tell you what to do with his property. There's no contract there. It's his property.
So the United States controls this area of territory, therefore they have the right to dictate their government.
No,
and their
because it's
bureaucracy
illegitimate, because they stole the land and they enforce their rules through violence, and they have a monopoly on power and violence. It's if you want to use the traditional anarchist definition, it's an unjustified hierarchy, right? If you want to go Chomsky's, right? So again, there's a massive distinction between a private property owner that owns their own property and a state that it has gotten their property, if you will, through conquest and through theft. And there's a massive difference between being a guest in someone's home or being a guest in a covenant community and having to follow those rules versus you never getting to sign a contract, you never getting to be a guest, and there's nowhere you can go except Chiron, fucking Mexico. That's literally it. And you might get killed by cartels on your way there.
So the covenant community... The covenant community, correct me if I'm wrong. The covenant community has the monopoly on power over a given area because they own the property. They own all the property within that covenant community, and they're able to subject you to the whims of their rules through an unspoken contract, which you choose to agree to when you enter their property as an unspoken social norm. How this community acquires their land, I have no idea. Because you know what? All land is stolen at some point. Okay, so
we already solved all of this.
I need to get this in here. I need to get this in here because I thought that was going to be the answer I was given by Lucas. Okay?
No.
Wait.
They don't get to violate your natural laws.
So your answer is just going to be no, and you didn't let me finish, but that's okay. I'm just going to address what Lucas was saying really quickly about homesteading, right? Because I think it's important to address the fact that he said this. And basically, he talked earlier about, again, a neutral arbiter that determines whether to give people reparations based on the property that was stolen for them or not. Now, as I understand it, all property is stolen at some point, and if you're unable to find the original person who owned that property, presided on that land,
that's a lie.
You're just...
all property is not stolen.
I'm not done.
Homesteading exists.
Okay, so do you know how... So can I just say that the United States homesteaded that territory?
We don't have time for any more questions. We're at the 50-second marker, and I have a feeling if you ask one, we're going to go down yet another path that we cannot...
I'm sorry I'm so long-winded.
Yeah, BPF. I'll just wrap up my...
Hang on. You're going to be able to wrap up everything in your closing statement. Okay?
Oh, for sure.
Everything
Okay.
that you wanted to go
Andrew's
after,
a good moderator.
You guys are going to have 5 minutes each. Now, I do ask you to try to be somewhat brief with these.
Appreciate all the follows tonight, guys.
Q&A. We want to make sure we get to all of it for everybody so that it's fair. We're going to start this in the opposite direction. Dylan, go ahead, start with your closing statement, and then we'll move it across.
Well, yeah, so basically... I guess I'll use this closing statement period of mine to address what I was going to say there, and that basically what it sounds like to me is that one of these so-called covenant communities is ceded authority over a given demographic that doesn't consent to its rules and laws as if they were any other state. which is just ridiculous to me. You also heard Scott say earlier that anarchism can look like a state, which kind of defeats the purpose and just explains some weird moral grandstanding they were talking about. I'm not too sure, but I'll wrap this up on a note of saying that my system, which efficiently upholds the rights of people, protects them from crimes being committed against them, and does a plethora of other things to control and have a national identity, a unifying defense, things like that. All of these things benefit the members of that given society. There's absolutely no reason to not have a state exist in the world today, especially one in which you sign this so-called social contract, which it sounded like they were starting to agree with when addressing one of their covenant communities we were talking about earlier. Sounds like they agree with that premise anyways. And I'm basically just going to come out here and say, you do that when you agree to live on the United States territory. I'll cede the rest of my time. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Dylan, can I ask you just a quick question since you ceded over the rest of your time? Are you still coming over to the Chad side from the evil communist side? Are we gonna be able to get you over to the gonna get married, have children, drink beer, have job side? Are we getting there, Dylan?
Come to Jesus. Come to Jesus.
I did in fact get engaged recently.
Yes! There we go.
You got engaged, Dylan?
Yeah.
Congratulations. Dang.
It was to a girl, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, good, yeah.
I'm kidding.
I didn't know
Fucking...
how the person identified.
Wait, why would that matter, Andrew? Why
I'm
would
kidding.
That matter?
I'm fucking joking.
It...
You know, this is a whole fucking problem, Looter. You know, you can't even make a good old-fashioned sexist joke without one of you fucking liberals freaking out, you know? Anyway, moving over. Let's start on the top to my left. Go ahead.
Oh, it's reversed on it.
Oh, you're left. My bad.
Yeah,
my bad.
Lucas.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Stage
So,
left.
Yeah, sorry. God damn it, that got me out of. So I want to institute.
I don't
say
think he
something
sucks
real
that bad.
quick.
Honestly, I think he's good.
What my opponents here have done is they have tried to convolute the difference between a government and a state. What is the difference between a state and a government, you may ask? Well, a state is an institution funded through compulsory payments with a monopoly on law, force, or right enforcement. That is what a state is. The fact that it was funded through compulsory payments, that is what makes it a state. If people voluntarily choose to have one right enforcement agency, that is not a state. That is just a right enforcement agency. My opponents here have decided to convolute the terms and pollute the waters to try to make this debate more confusing for the audience than it has to be. That is one of the strategies that they decided to do. Now, people have said things in this discussion like men need to be ruled, men is incapable of governing themselves. I disagree with that. Why do I disagree with that? Because I think there's two possibilities, right? There's one possibility, and it's that man is so bad that he cannot govern himself and he's incapable of making decisions for himself. If this is the case and man is incapable of making decisions for himself, what is it that is different about the men that are ruling over these men? Are they made out of something different? Are they a superior kind of being? Or are they just the same species as we are? What happened?
Keep going.
Nothing.
Oh my
I'm
God.
sorry. That was inappropriate.
Keep going.
Bad, sir.
Sorry. So that is what I'm saying. My opponents here think that that it's not okay for men to govern themselves. I hold that it's not true. I think that is 100% capable for men to govern themselves, and that is the only moral thing that we can do. To allow men to govern themselves, their property, and pursue happiness in the way that we're supposed to from nature or God, whatever you choose to believe in. And I say the rest of my time.
Sorry about that, Lucas. We joke around here too much, but that was an awesome closing statement. All right, Luda. Wait, we can't hear you, Andrew.
Yeah, it was a great closing statement, but who the fuck is heavy breathing? Was that?
It's not me. I was muted.
Dude,
I'm muted.
dude,
Is it me? Is it me?
I don't
think
know.
it might
I don't
be you,
know.
Pedro.
Is it you, Pedro? Mute your fucking mic, Pedro. What the fuck? All right, Looter, you're up, buddy.
Yeah, so one thing that I want to talk about is that I think that we have to recognize that while like no individual is inherently superior to another, we just have to acknowledge the fact that people will take irrational actions and act immorally no matter what circumstances they're in. It could be a president, it could be, a construction worker, it could be anybody. People have the capacity to act irrationally and immorally. And when we're talking about a system of governance or a system that we choose to operate under, I think the best system that we can possibly have is a system that limits the individual's capability to act immorally. And that's why I believe in a state, right? Because when we're talking about a democracy, we have this intricate system of checks and balances, which makes sure that people cannot act too immorally or too irrationally. And while I would acknowledge that it does happen, we provide a system which limits that from happening at all. I think one part of this debate that disappointed me, and I have to say, is the fact that there was multiple times where I would pose hypotheticals or pose questions to test the ANCAP's position, and they would repeatedly respond to that by effectively calling me disingenuous, saying that I'm bad faith, saying that I'm full of shit, and hardly even engaged with the question whatsoever. There was 15 minutes left in the discussion until Fabian Liberty finally decided, okay, now, after we've been talking for over an hour, now I will finally engage with this system, right? I will finally engage with this hypothetical. So I would have liked to see more engagement and more back and forth, and less of the behavior that I seem to see so happen and so frequently on the left, where people tend to have this propensity to have no substance whatsoever to their positions, just spout and recycle philosophical arguments at you, morally grandstand, and just throw out like ad homs and say that you're disingenuous. I think it's not a great form of argumentation. I would have liked to see more substance from my opponents, but I can't control what they say. So I will see the rest of my time with that. Thank you.
Dylan, what the fuck are you doing?
Huh? In terms of what?
What the fuck are you? We've been.
He's texting his girl, bro.
I've been making fun of you in this chat. I've been making fun of you in this chat. You haven't even been paying attention. The whole chat's been making fun of you. And what? You've been looking at. You haven't even seen all the jokes. You haven't even seen all the fucking jokes. What the hell?
Hope so,
all right,
Marla.
go ahead.
You can't mock me if I can't hear it.
Go ahead, Fabian. You're up.
So my opponent says that people act irrationally and immorally. Now, people don't act irrationally. That's not true unless they have a mental disease of some sort. What people do is they are rational actors. If my opponent understood economics and had studied Austrian economic theory and things of that nature, they would understand that people are, by and large, rational actors. They do, however, act immorally. They act immorally all of the time. And the very system that he espouses for, the state, is one that is, we have shown clearly throughout this discussion and throughout a majority of our content online, is an immoral system. It is a system that can be used to take advantage of. The very incentive structures that exist within a state are designed so that individuals that are rational actors will use those systems and those immoral means as a means to be able to take advantage of other people. This is both rational and immoral. It is not irrational to fuck over your fellow man when you have incentive structures that are designed to do so. What we advocate for is anarchism. Anarchism is the very means by getting rid of those incentives, by ensuring that people have freedom, by ensuring that people have liberty, and that we're not prostituted by the state, that we do not have theft and burglary and murder as our system of keeping people in power. Now, my opponent says, well, you didn't engage enough with all of this, with the hypothetical. You only waited an hour. As a matter of fact, I find that hilarious because if you go back and watch the VOD, I gave such a long-winded answer that everyone had to comment on how, oh my gosh, that was such a long answer. There's a lot to tackle. And I sat quiet for a few minutes so that other people could extrapolate upon all of the ways that I did answer the question. And furthermore, he knowingly brought an example that dominated the conversation in many ways, kind of very adroit of him to bring up what he thought was the best example from a previous debate. Why? Because as the socialists have seen from their reframing and their gaslighting and their constant uses of rhetorical tricks, that they're not able to actually mount a defense against what it is that we say. Instead, they simply they say that, oh, well, that's not actually an issue. Let me explain how your system has all of these issues. Let me create hypotheticals that have multiple points of failure, and then you have to engage with all of these multiple points of failure. And we engage with all of those multiple points of failure, and they say, oh, well, that's not good enough. And then we say, well, here's an example of that occurring without those multiple points of failure within your own systems of the state. And they go, well, we're not going to talk about Rotherham, UK. We're not going to talk about all of the children that were molested. We're not going to talk about all of the sexual exploitation that occurred because that doesn't fit my argument. So it is they who refuse to engage with questions. As a matter of fact, we'll go back to my opening state for a moment. I listed off the founders, the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and I listed off many of the people that started the Revolutionary War. And I said, if they were, are they or are they not justified in their actions, or should we have been forced to remain under the power of King George III? And I said all of the systems of the state that we currently have are much, much worse. And we see that over time, institutions and states get more and more power. And what did they do? Well, that's another thing that they chose not to engage with, that I'm somewhat saddened that they didn't engage with it. I brought up some of the history of what states have done, and I asked them, give me one example. Just give me one. I'll give you a few. The Iga Sakuku Iki that was taken over by Nobunaga, unfortunately. I gave them the example of the Icelandic Tain system. I gave them the example of the Republic of Kospaya, and I gave them the example of Tehran. They seem to find one chink in the armor of Tehran, despite the fact that it's not really a chink, it's just a bad sourcing on their behalf. And yet they didn't answer. They couldn't find. As a matter of fact, Dylan said, oh, what about Yugoslavia? You know, that place that was founded with 3 different countries and founded upon murder and violence and, has a system of taxation. And it meets all of the characteristics of what we were saying. Again and again, a big problem. And lastly, I will close the same way that I opened. Yes, I understand that some systems are worse. Some forms of slavery are more pernicious and take more of a toll from your body. We can look at the fact that 97% of the transatlantic trade slave, it went to South America, where people were worked to death in sugar plantations, and the American slaves had it much, much better. And at the same time, those working in the cotton fields that were picking and beaten and brutally used by the state, well, they had it. They didn't have it they had it much, much worse than the house Negroes. And I will say that just because our current system is better doesn't mean that I want to be a house Negro. I want to be a free man. And that is my closing statement.
We appreciate all the debaters tonight. That was actually quite a good debate. I enjoyed it far more than I thought I would. We do things a little bit differently at the Crucible. Some of you may know this, some of you may not. Once the closing statements are done, we consider the debate close. Now that doesn't mean during the Q&A that
I looked up the TOS.
Pedro,
I'm allowed to
don't
say
mute
that.
your mic, I swear. I don't know.
Not only the TOS,
Are you
but
just
also
the world's heaviest
tweets
breather?
from
Is that your world's best
from
mic?
them.
I don't know.
It's the world's best mic.
It's the world's
It picks up everything.
It picks up everything.
Yeah, it
But
does.
anyway, the debate's closed. I have some
No,
questions
that
of
is
my own. This
explicitly
is the first
against
time
it.
I think my questions are not going to be equal to both sides. I feel like I understand leftist ideology through and through, but the ANCAPs, I did have some questions on this.
Now we can engage in ANCAP as opposed to just
Yeah.
anarchism. I advocate
Right.
for both.
Well, now we can.
As if we weren't engaging with ANCAPism versus statism the entire time.
Of course we were. I mean, there was only, I mean, we kind of knew how that might end up going.
It's
But
okay.
I just wanted to say first, I learned today that when me and Pedro are out hunting on a trip, I can piss on his couch and he can't do anything about it except ask me to leave. So that's that's pretty cool, And then I did want to bring up, Scott's comparison between America and Canada. I didn't think it was very fair, Scott. Okay, I really didn't think it was very fair. Moving into 3 quick questions I have. The gang rape women to save the world versus penny to save the world argument.
Mhm.
So the argument from the left-hand side moved in with, do you feel that it's moral to steal a penny even if it'll save the world? Your answer is no, stealing the penny is still immoral.
Yes.
The turnaround to that was, well, would you guys gang rape a woman in order to save the world? And it sounded like there was concession on the left side too. So from the audience's standpoint, doesn't this just kind of sound like all of you have your morals fucked up, or?
No, so there's a difference between whether or not something is immoral or so the question really is, you're placed between an impossible decision, right? And it's designed to test if you actually believe the things that you, right? So you're put into an impossible situation, which is you have to choose between 2 evil acts, right? One evil act is theft, and the other evil act is by your own inaction allowing the entirety of the world to end, right? So you're forced in a situation where you have to choose between 2 immoral things, right? And so it's perfectly justified and it's perfectly reasonable to steal a penny in order to save the world, right? And it's the same situation. The problem is that he threw that quick jab out to me, right, to try and get me to bite this bullet, to make me seem ridiculous by saying it's immoral to do that without actually having a chance to extrapolate why that is. So I reframed it back to him in a much, much harsher way so that the audience can understand that, like, look, I'm not going to fall for this dumb tactic where you're trying to make me seem like I'm a crazy person, because he framed it in such a way as to ask me whether or not it's immoral, not whether or not I would do it or not whether or not it's justified. He intentionally framed it in such a way and so that the audience would think that I'm this crazy ANCAP that wouldn't take one penny in order to save the entire world, and then I'm just sitting over here like, you know, like never, never, never. And so I reframed it in a ridiculous and absurd way, because this is not a choice that anyone in the world is ever going to have. No one is ever going to have that choice.
You're a deontologist, correct, Scott? You're a deontologist?
None of us are.
I'm asking Scott. You're not a deontologist?
I'm a functionalist.
You're a functionalist, gotcha.
Okay, so over to the left-hand side, the same question. Gang rape to save the world?
Yeah, I mean, I would ask you, Scott, or Andrew. I mean, you recognize, right? We both recognize that gang rape is wrong and immoral, correct?
Yeah.
But even under your system, yes. But I'll just ask you this.
Yeah, sure.
Even under your system, right? You're a Christian, correct?
Yes.
So if God revealed himself to you and said, the world's going to end, and in order for you to save the world, I need you to rape somebody in order to save the world, and God commanded you to do it, would you do it, and would it be moral?
He couldn't. That would go against the immutable nature of God. Yes, that's correct.
Why would it go against the immutable nature of God?
Because the nature of God's immutable.
How have you determined the immutable nature of God?
Because
the Bible.
The Bible says that his nature is immutable.
So you think that
interpretation
of God
So what you're asking
God's
me,
will.
just so you know, what you're asking me is, what would fire feel like if it wasn't hot?
No, that's not what I'm asking you.
No, it is. What you're asking me is, what would fire feel like if it wasn't hot? And then you want me to give you a description of what that would be like, and I can't. It's not possible. You're asking me something that goes against its immutable nature. Tell me, what would fire feel like if it wasn't hot, Luther?
If I had no concept of fire and I had no concept of hot, then I wouldn't be able to explain it to you.
Right.
Then we have no scripture that tells us that God would actually do something like
But
that.
the thing
it's
is,
against
do
the
you
immutable. It's against the immutable
do you
nature.
believe that you can understand God, though? That humans can understand God perfectly?
We can understand His commandments. That's what our belief structure would say.
Why?
So
Why?
in order to just to get right to the point and explain the answer as concisely as I can, in our worldview,
He's going after him for his
you
Christianity.
would not be able to do a
It's
gang
rough.
rape, even to save.
I tried that. He's slippery on that shit.
Even if
It
God
burns.
commanded you to
As
do
But he's
it?
right on this
says,
one.
and
Even if God commanded you to do it, you
well,
wouldn't
hang
do it.
on. God couldn't command us to. That's what I'm saying. He couldn't.
How can
do
you
it.
claim to know that God wouldn't command you to do this?
Because it
How
would
can
be
you possibly
against.
claim that?
Because it's against His immutable characteristics as laid down by the Bible.
By
That's why I'm
human's
saying.
interpretation of what God told him, correct?
Correct.
Can you
But even hang on, even if that's true, what I'm saying is under our deontological framework, the answer would be no, you can't do it. Now, we can get into all the reasons why that would be. I think it's irrelevant to the question. I can just simply concisely answer for you.
Can I add?
Because under Proverbs, it says the lesser of two evils, this is what Solomon wrote, is still evil.
So I just want to add for a second. I'm pretty sure if Big Papa Fascist heard God command him to do something that evil, he would just assume that he has like a Son of Sam issue. And like he's probably got a mental issue because God couldn't command him to do that, and he's like, I must be sick. I need to go to the hospital.
Well, it would be against his immutable characteristics
Right.
of what he's already
No.
laid down, so it's impossible.
No, God commanded people to commit genocide in His name and wipe out entire nations, right?
Well,
so is it really?
we're not-
May I answer that? I have a.
Hang on,
I have a.
we're not getting into a theological debate. If you want to come back and have one of those, Luther, we're happy to do it. Right?
I'd love to. Yeah, I don't want to take up too much.
I'd love to too. I'd love to tackle that.
We can totally
This
have
is
that
my
conversation.
favorite subject. This sounds like you know so much.
The Jews didn't finish. All right.
Go for it.
The only evil was that the Jews didn't finish.
Oh, what?
I'm kidding.
No.
What? That's enough of that.
Yeah, no.
Well, I'm saying they
what?
didn't finish, so they didn't fully take over all the lands that God commanded. It was a joke.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
That
Like,
makes sense.
no.
I was like, did
No.
he just go Wignat on us?
No.
What just happened here?
I'm saying they didn't fulfill God's commandment by purging out everyone.
Right. Right.
They could have forcibly
Okay.
evicted them. Maybe they misunderstood it.
Okay, so to my next question,
God.
this one's to Lucas. If you shoot somebody from across the border, Lucas, and it isn't illegal in your country, what do you think would happen?
The other state would invade to try to put the person in jail, I suppose. I don't know. It depends on the state that's defending the rights of the person that was shot.
You're not really sure what would happen?
It would depend on the state. Like, are you saying somebody that's within America got shot?
Well, I had noticed.
Hypothetical America.
The reason that I said this is because you had posed this hypothetical of saying if
Oh my
there's
God,
a border
Wellspring.
argument for jerking off. Essentially, you're on one side of a border, and in your scenario, it was Mexico says it's legal for you to jerk off. And the United States says it's
This
not.
Lord of the Flies
so you're
actually
kind of
an
in
ANCAP book.
catch-22, right?
No.
You're standing on the one
Might be
side of the
ANPRIM,
border
though.
and you're looking over there and you're like, fuck, I can't do anything, right? So what if in your country then the law was, well, you can just pop them off and it's okay, and there won't be any criminal repercussions here, right? Would that be okay, or?
I mean, I don't advocate for nation states, so like, why would I? What?
Well, this is a point in your favor, not against you.
Like, are you saying like, what if the state made laws that it was okay to kill people?
Well,
What
right.
would happen then?
I enjoyed your border analogy because you were essentially
Yeah.
saying if you have two state disagreement, one state says
Yeah.
this thing that's affecting you from the other state is bad, but your state says it's not. Well, wouldn't that fall under the purview if you could just like shoot somebody from over across the border and they really couldn't do anything about it, right? Because yeah, okay. I was just curious about it. I thought it was interesting because we do have a parallel like that called North and South Korea, right? So
True.
I just thought it was interesting. That's all. It was an interesting argument I hadn't heard.
It was a good
before.
trap.
It was good. It was decent. So I wanted to bring that up. Fabian,
Thank you.
Fabian socialist. I'm sorry, not socialist.
The Fabian
I
soci-
hear
the
Fabian.
Fabian
What do
Society.
you want me to do? What do you want me to do when I hear Fabian? Anyway,
Just continue reading the next word, which is liberty,
Yeah.
so that you understand the joke.
Liberty.
Yeah.
Isn't a rights enforcement agency called the fucking police?
Well, no. So what I argue for through the transition actually is, I think, and this is, I'll throw a bone to the socialists since you called me
ESOP
Fabian
models, yeah.
socialist. I think one of the things I advocate for is ESOP models, right? I think ESOP is a great transition to privatized policing. But the problem when you say isn't a rights enforcement agency a police? Well, a more accurate description was they would operate more like an insurance company, and they would likely have police agencies under their contract, like retainer, for situations of enforcement when something bad happens. Because like when you look at car insurance companies, and I think I made this analogy to you before, right? 97% roughly of car accidents between two individuals don't actually go to court. And the reason is because the two insurance agencies, they have people that work in property damage, they have people that work in casualty, they have people that work in bodily harm, and then they have people that work in litigation, right? And so when two people disagree, more often than not, Geico and Nationwide kind of work it out. It's not Bob and and Sarah that are like trying to figure out how to settle this car accident. It's Nationwide and Geico, right? They both have car insurance. Nationwide says, look, we'll pay you this amount. And then if they refuse, then it ends up going into litigation. And then the lawyers start talking it out. But even then, a majority of those cases get handled before they ever go to court. So what we're advocating for is simply, instead of having the judicial portion for that 3% of cases, let's say, right? We have a third party arbitrating firm, right? That insurance companies tend to agree on, right? They say, the insurance companies negotiate. Now, if they're unable to negotiate completely, right? And the other individual is unwilling to budge and they've harmed other people, then obviously, yes, you have to use the police, right? But that doesn't mean that you have a monopoly on the police power. What we have now is we have a police agency that's not beholden to the people. And that's why the left and so many other people are so angry, right? Like the police, there's so many issues with policing because the police are not actually required to protect anybody's rights. As a matter of fact, there are Supreme Court cases in America that show that police are not legally required to protect you. Police can see you getting violently mugged.
We did see And under the VLM, there was instances where there were
Yeah.
stand down orders. That's true enough.
And I think if
the right
Seattle
should be able
had a
to
couple
set up
different
the-
competing companies to protect Seattle, I think you might have a much more efficient form of policing than if you just had a bunch of left-wing nut Marxists that are in charge of the police, and the police's only job is to support the laws as handed down by the state. There's so many levels of corruption and failure within that system, and then they want to look at mine and go, well, look at how your system's corrupt and fails. And it's like, well, you gave me a fucking hypothetical with a bunch of layers of corruption and failure, but it's not like our system doesn't exist that way. It's not like the police don't have plenty of fucking problems in America.
Well, we're just trying to understand.
So over to Luder and Dylan, same question. Aren't police the rights enforcement agency already that they're advocating for in Ancapistan?
I mean, it seems like police effectively or the rights enforcement agencies effectively operate in the same function as the police, the government, and a state, but they just want to do rhetorical backflips to say that it's not technically a state because we acquired the land legitimately and it's voluntary. I feel like that's the only distinction. And like,
Can I add a little bit?
The reason why I have a hard time understanding where you're coming from when you're talking about rights enforcement agencies or policing, especially when we're talking about Seattle, is like, if we have multiple policing institutions in Seattle, what happens if we engage in an altercation and I call one police organization and you call another police organization and they confront each other? How do you determine the difference, or how do you resolve that conflict?
Yeah, so
it sounded like Lucas wanted to get in there.
Yeah,
for just
yeah,
a
go
second.
ahead, I'm sorry.
Lucas.
Yeah. So what Luder is getting at is, it's actually one of the problems that I posed from the beginning, right? It's the idea of a third-party arbitration. Now, the solution that our opponents propose is to have one single arbitrator that decides all conflicts. Now, the problem with that is that this single arbitrator that resolves all conflicts also resolves all the conflicts that this institution is involved in, right? What does that mean? That since he's the one arbitrating everything, he can initiate conflict against a second party, right? And since he is going to be the one deciding who is right and who is wrong, he can initiate conflict at any time, since he's the one that's going to decide who is right and who is wrong. We say that we shouldn't have only one arbitrator. You already admitted that when you said there is nobody, there's a third-party arbitration between the citizenry and the state. So what we say is we shouldn't have one single arbitrator. We should have competition of arbitration for conflict resolution.
So that's just simply not true, right? If we both live within the same system and we both have a vote, we are both represented in the system.
Who's
we both have,
who's the arbitrator between the state and the citizenry?
You're just going to ask me a question that I already gave to you when I'm trying to explain it to you. I already gave you an answer to the question, right? So what I'm saying is that we both have, I mean, if you really want to get down to it, right, like the third party arbitration there between yourself and the state would be the jury, right? We have a jury of our peers in our justice system, and that's effectively what determines whether or not you committed a crime or not. But what I am trying to say, what I am trying to get an answer to, which you seem to have failed to answer, is that if we're in Seattle, for example, and we have multiple different policing organizations within Seattle, and we engage in an altercation or a conflict, and I call one police institution and you call another police institution, and they both arrive at the same time, how do you resolve that conflict? And I would like you to give me an answer to that question directly without obfuscating or talking about other things.
It's very simple. The same, in many of the same ways that the state already does it. Right? I mean, you know, when you have an issue, you have issues of jurisdiction. Well, it's the same thing under private property, right? Who's in charge of this area? Who's in charge of that area? Are there multiple people so you're not calling cops because you're calling your rights enforcement agency, and then your rights enforcement agency is calling their local PD to try and get into the situation, and then you have multiple cops competing. That's not happening, right? You're not having a war between the police officers. It's a bit fantastical the way that you're kind of describing this. All that's happening is you live in a neighborhood, right? And let's say your neighborhood has an HOA. Your HOA has determined that they want community policing. And then another neighborhood has a police contract, right? Well, if there's an issue in neighborhood A, it's handled by the community police. If it's an issue in neighborhood B, it's handled by the people that have jurisdiction with the contracts. Now, I may have to drive through neighborhood A to get to neighborhood B, but that's fine. Freedom of movement is a thing within anarchism, right? You can't just say, "Oh, we're going to wall off everything and you can't move through our system without paying a toll." That might be a thing, right? And you may have to go around, et cetera, et cetera. But like you're trying to get us to explain a system of governance within a city. And you're trying to get like a quick and concise answer to a hypothetical that you've set up where two police agencies would go to war with each other. I have no idea what system you're talking about when you explain that, because it's certainly not the system I'm advocating for. And as a matter of fact, me having to explain all of policing within a new government proposed system that's radically different from the state is something that we could have an entire debate on, right? I have whole videos on it. It's a complex thing. You want a simple, quick answer to a hypothetical that I simply don't agree would exist.
Right, but the problem is that it's...
Wait, can I say something real quick?
You can, but we've got a ton of questions.
Yeah.
Let's try to keep it concise, okay?
That's fair. Well, I was just going to say this, Scott kind of like addressed this, right? Right enforcement agencies will
Oh
work
shit,
very
last
similar
username.
to insurance companies, right? When there is a dispute between two insurance companies, right? I think it's 97%.
Absolutely. 100% less.
Scott.
Sorry, no, dude, last username just actually spoke in my chat. And he gave his answer, which is REA have treaties to resolve disputes with each other. They have a strong incentive to establish these treaties. Interagency war is extremely expensive and generates no revenue. And he's 100% right.
That is partially what,
he's been gone for like 6 months. Sorry.
That is what I was getting to. That there is an incentive for these right enforcement agencies to solve the conflict without going to war, because war is very, very expensive, right? So they will probably, like insurance companies do already, they would solve this between each other with treaties and contracts that they mutually agree to avoid.
What if they can't come to an agreement? Then what happens? What if they can't come to an agreement?
They would go to a third-party arbitrator if they.
They're going to go out of business. If police agencies can't come to any fucking agreement within the city and other people can, then no one's going to hire police that have fucking that don't have contracts and can't resolve issues. No, that's the beauty of the free market. When there's failures in the state, they just throw more money at it and make more problems.
They just steal more money and throw it at it.
But if the entire focus of your rights enforcement agency is to enforce your rights, and they're effectively shielding you from punishment from this other rights enforcement agency, it sounds like they're doing a pretty good job protecting your rights because you're able to skirt punishment on their behalf.
That's not what's happening. We're talking about insurance companies.
I'm sorry, guys. We've got to move on. Pedro, I yield my time to you. Whatever questions you had.
Gotcha. Okay, Lucas, you're very interesting to me, my friend. I just want to know this really quick. Is there any piece of land on Earth of tactical value that has not ever been warred over, from whatever scale you can imagine?
Probably not. I don't think we've rejected it.
Okay. Is there anyone in your system, Fabian, you can get on this too, that has power over someone else?
Under our system? What do you mean? Define power. Like a father has power over his children.
Tell them what to, okay.
You know what I mean? Like plenty of people have power and influence.
How about out in regular society, outside of the family? Is there anyone who has substantial power to be able to tell someone else to do?
Yes. So this is the problem of it's really complicated, but it depends on how you define power. I'll say this: a contract.
No, I'm just saying this. Can someone else tell anyone else what to do, and they need to do it, or else there are repercussions?
Obviously, that exists within human society. But the thing is that
within my house, you are not allowed to pee on my couch.
Outside the house.
Remove you out.
Outside the house.
Well, the first thing you need to know is that there's very little distinction because all of the land is privatized. That the whole point is to get rid of conflict is that we privatize everything. By everything being privatized, it is the individual or individuals, right, that own the property that decide what is acceptable and what are the rules within their own property. But the thing here is that let's say you have a contract, right? And this is where you start getting into English common law. If you have a contract and someone has undue influence, that's not a valid contract. So even though someone may say, you better do this type of situation because they have too much power in the sense. It's too much capital, or let's say, they have a monopoly on labor for whatever reason, or a monopsony. You can't have a monopoly in this situation, but you have a monopsony, right? If they're able to exert undue influence, they're not able to give you market fair jobs for some reason. They're able to force you into doing certain things. That's not a valid contract because it is as coercion, or if they're fraudulent in some capacity. These are all these contracts are invalidated by the common law perspective.
So just to
Love in the
shorten it up,
Marxism,
it's not,
Scott.
it can't be a yes or no. It's a very gray situation, correct?
I mean,
answering my question, there is no yes
yeah,
or no.
it's again, not unless you had an extremely concise definition of power.
Well, there's too much nuance, so we can't answer your question. Okay.
I mean, I gave him plenty of information and additional nuance.
This is where
Scott,
it comes
that nuance is the new N-word on Twitch, so.
Yeah, that's what we say. Nuance is the new N-word on Twitch.
Well, this is where I was going to go at the 1 hour and 13 mark for you, Lucas. You want equality under the law, correct?
Yes.
Is there a force of any kind upholding that law in your system that has power over another person?
No, I mean, so this is something that I don't think I understand fully. Are you saying, like, is there a possibility that rights
You
would
want
be
equality
violated?
you want equality under the law, right?
Yes.
Law requires
Yes.
entities to uphold them. That requires individuals who have powers over other people. Before, you guys said I can't really answer a yes or no, but I still want this thing.
Well, look at the name of
I'm
my
not sure I'm
channel,
following.
right? The name of my channel is Fabian Liberty, because we believe that in order for this system to work, you need a certain critical mass of individuals. You need a community of like-minded values and ideas, right?
That was my last question.
So
That was actually for you, Fabian.
Okay, well, then I'll
45-minute
answer.
mark. What is a covenant community? What's the difference between it and our constitutional community right now?
Well, we've answered it several times by saying, what's the difference between a state and a government, right?
It's
A
voluntary and the land was acquired legitimately. That's the distinction.
It's
as far as I
voluntary. The
understand.
land was acquired legitimately, and they don't have the right to, invalidate, certain natural laws unless you specifically sign said contract, right? So they could have a right to restrict your movement if you sign the contract in doing so, but a guest into the area, they could eject them, they could make them go around, but they can't, let's say, for example, block off a mountain pass. At a certain point, you're violating my natural rights to being able to move freely as a body. Like, you're restricting me in a capacity that I'm not able to move. I'm not able to adequately do anything. But that being said, again, going back to the culture, right? If you watch my video, How Can Anarchism Defend Itself? One of the things that I talk about why Republic of Cospaya failed, right, is because Republic of Cospaya lasted nearly 400 years. Almost 400 years. But the reason it eventually failed was because criminals realized that they could go to the Republic of Cospaya to evade either the officials or the law from Florence or from the Papal States. And so the culture began to deteriorate. The culture became one of individual freedom and working together and, respecting our private property, but also working without a state. And they had a system of commerce that was legitimized through the tobacco trade. And one of the reasons it worked well was because tobacco was legal there, but it wasn't legal in Florence or in Italy in order to produce. So they had economic entanglement. No one wanted to invade or fuck them up, because if they did so, they'd lose their tobacco. The problem was once the culture deteriorated, they used to be a very Catholic structured society, and a lot of criminals came in, and the church stopped having any power in terms of being able to influence the culture, and it started to deteriorate because they didn't share common values anymore. A lot of people were criminals. And so in order for anarchism to work in any society, I think it's very important that a majority or a critical mass of people believe in this system and have a common cultural thing. It could be the weakness or the chink in the armor to anarchism compared to necessarily statism. It very well could be.
Fabian's a cultural nationalist, man. He's a cultural nationalist.
Not a cult
Look
man.
at him.
I'm
He's
simply
coming over, bro. He's coming over.
But I mean, look at Tehran. Tehran
Fabian,
has the same situation. They have a shared, unique, indigenous cultural religion.
Yeah, let's wrap it up. Scott believes in cultural hegemony like the rest of us do. Except for the fact that he can't enforce
We
it
don't
and
wanna
there's no way
enforce
of
it. We don't
maintaining
wanna
it.
enforce it.
Yeah, because I don't
Chill
violate
out,
people's
guys,
rights.
Chill out, guys. My last question This is to Looter, concerning Bible, because you brought it up.
Sure.
Do you know what textual criticism is? Like just the two main domains of textual criticism?
You'd have to explain it to me. Sorry.
Don't get into it. Just don't.
Oh yeah.
It's for another day, another time. Right?
Hey,
I know he threw down the gauntlet you love the most, but we gotta get to the rest of it, brother.
I am more
Gotcha.
than willing to have that conversation with either of you if y'all are interested. So that's fine.
For sure.
We can have that conversation another time.
Thank you. All right, from Sent to Fabian, would you be down to debate the ethics of paying for meat, or are you still scared of this smoke?
I'm not scared of the smoke. I've had
I've
had two interactions with him, and he screamed and yelled and lied on Thanksgiving Day when I was coming to hang out. And this is like one of the 2 times I ever hung out in Queen Alexa's server. I went in there to be like, hey.
See, we're in that Discord then.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Whoa,
Scott.
hang on now.
Whoa.
Wait.
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't know anything about
Then
any of those
that
people.
truth comes
The
out.
So I went over to see like, what are these people doing, right? I was like, what are these people about? Like, what are these people about? Like, what's this community like? And Synth came in and screamed at me and was like, "Do you believe in the non-aggression principle?" And I'm like, "Yeah, like Happy Thanksgiving." And he's like, "Well, then why are you okay with murdering pigs? You don't believe in the NAP?" And I tried to explain it to him, and he was like, "Oh." And so like, no, I'm not fucking debating a guy that just yells and screams and does shit in bad faith, especially when he doesn't have like an audience I can pull from. Like, I gain nothing from it because he's a very small YouTuber and doesn't have any space on Twitch. And so like,
you're
you
pretty
know,
small
yeah.
too. Scott, you're pretty small too. Plus, I think that just sounded like a long-winded way of saying I'm scared of the smoke.
Yeah, no, I'm not scared of the smoke. Like, I have plenty of arguments, but he just yells and screams and is a bitch.
And the thing is that
No balls.
The Crucible synth might be very different.
I'm the
than
hippy
the
dippy
Discord
champion.
synth.
Wait,
Third
Fabian,
Rumble champion.
Yeah,
I'm not
why
afraid
don't
of
you-
any
why
fucking
don't-
smoke.
Why don't you go get your Dylan Burns belt and do a little dance for us, Fabian?
If I can defeat Destiny in our 1v1, I will.
Yeah, and I'm the regional Mario Kart Luigi Circuit champion. The fuck does that have to do with anything?
I'm just saying,
Pretty good.
I ain't afraid of no fucking smoke.
That was pretty good. That was good. Come on, Fabian. You got to give him credit. That was good.
I didn't understand the
Gotcha.
joke. I'm sorry.
Next
I'm not a
question
true
comes
gamer.
from J.Y. Lewis. It's for the anarchist side of the panel. How would they deal with two groups in the same community having different standards for rights, or have contradictory contracts between different agencies?
Do you want this one, or do you want me to take it?
Sure, you take it.
Yeah,
Took
so
last
the,
one.
the implication here is an understanding of natural law, right? So when you say two different groups, you can have two different groups within anarcho-capitalism. As a matter of fact, I think anarcho-syndicalists would actually do very well within anarcho-capitalism. The thing is, however, is that your society has to be constructed upon voluntarism, about the security of the contract, about freedom of movement and freedom of association. Now, if people don't agree with those basic core principles, then no, those two groups couldn't coexist, right? At a certain point in time, they're going to be fighting against each other, and it's not worth it that these two people exist within the same community. They'll have to separate themselves in some regard. That being said, if they do agree to these core things, there's going to be conflict, right? There's always conflict. There's always disagreement, right? You know, what one person might consider damages, another person might not consider damages. What one person might consider right or wrong, another person might not. But that's what the point of having rights enforcement agencies and arbitration is for. It's also what the point of a lot of different anarchist communities are for. I don't think everyone's going to live in Anarcho-capitalist, like we jokingly call it, right? If you don't believe in the core principles of Anarcho-capitalist, and we have anarchism, go live in anarcho-communist society. Go live in an anarcho-socialist society. Go live in an anarcho-syndicalist society, an anarcho-mutualist society, an anarcho-individualist, an anarcho-egoist, which, you know, if that could ever be a thing. But there's multiple different covenant communities. There are places for you to go. This is why we advocate for anarchism on a large scale as opposed to just anarcho-capitalism. But in order to be an Anarcho-capitalist, yeah, you got to agree to certain principles or it's just not going to fucking work.
I feel like I coined Anarchistan, and I should get.
No, that's an old
every-
one. That's an old one.
That's old.
That's old.
That's
Old.
like-
Real?
That's an
like
old
2000.
meme.
No, I was being fucking original. What kind of bullshit is this?
No, that's old.
All right.
That's
next one
older
comes
than
from Base Homeschool
Kekistan,
Mom.
actually.
It's for the
Yeah.
anarchist side of the panel once again. How does a rights enforcement agency have less monopoly on force than a local police department or the Italian mafia?
Sure. So what you noticed is that I don't know if Base Homeschool Mom noticed, but I agree that the police department is just like the Italian mafia. They both steal from you. They both force you to pay for them. I agree with that. The difference between a right enforcement agency and the police department or the Italian mafia, which is just two different gangs, is that the right enforcement agency it's not allowed to violate your rights, and if it does, then it's in violation of natural law, and it's just working as a state, which is what we are against. A state is the criminal organization that has a monopoly on law enforcement, right enforcement, or force.
But if you can't afford it, you got no rights, right, boys?
No.
we never said
Again,
that.
you keep saying that and mischaracterizing it. We answered that question multiple times. We get it. You hate
No, I never said
capitalism.
that.
You can just build a
Yeah.
fence or go ask somebody to work pro bono for you. Okay, that's how it functions.
Yeah.
Or you can
Come on, guys,
be a
panhandle.
member
Or
of
you
the
could just
right
let, or you could
union
just let
or
police
mutualism
shield Muslim rape gangs in England, and just have them arrest the fathers when they go to show up to try and protect their
Yeah,
children.
you can do that.
You could do that too. There's a lot of things you could do. That's not necessarily what we advocate for. So stop with the straw mans.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I would advocate for is that we engage in the system that we have, where, especially in the United States, right, we can elect officials who dictate how police operate within our society, right? So if we see this grave injustice that is taking place in our society,
You realize the
have the
debate's
means
over,
to
and this
correct
isn't
it.
answering the question at all, right?
okay, so now that I have a rebuttal, you don't want to hear it and say the debate's over. I was pretty sure that.
I mean, I'll go into it again. I answered that in my closing statement. Listen, I answered. I answered it in
I'm
my.
saying you guys can engage. Yeah.
I mean, I
Stay with
answered in my
you.
closing statement.
It sounds like
I
Scott-
answered
Why
it-
don't you answer it now, Scott? You
I
shouldn't be
an-
scared of
Well,
that.
no,
You should
well,
be
if you
scared
let
of
me
it.
fucking talk, I'll answer it. Here you go.
You
I
just
answered.
want to answer it,
I-
Scott.
No,
uh,
just let him answer.
Next question. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
oh no!
Let him answer. Let's hear
So you want to
Scott's
fucking call me out?
wonderful answer.
So no, you want to
Let's hear
fucking call me
Scott's
out for
wonderful
being
answer.
afraid to answer, but then you won't let me answer
No,
because you
Scott,
refuse
do
to let
Go
it go.
ahead.
So
Go
again,
ahead, Scott.
Let him.
well, fucking
Let
shut the
him.
fuck up. Right. So again, I answered this in my closing statement where you said that people were irrational and that people were immoral, and that the system of the state was designed to protect against irrationality and immorality. And I said, no, unless people have a mental disorder, they do not act irrationally. They act as rational actors. And that if you studied economics and studied a little bit of Austrian economics, especially, you'd understand this. People do act immorally, however, all of the time in their own rational self-interest. And the fact of the matter is that the state is by design immoral and has a ton of systems in it that are designed against theft, against damage of property, that are designed to keep people from being able to freely trade, etc., etc. And so the system in and of itself is designed to be immoral and is designed to be created in regulatory capture and with individuals of power that want to use this power and authority for immoral means. And what we advocate for is a competition of systems that are not designed to be immoral, because the systems of power are not designed in any way, shape, or form to allow that. Instead, the incentive structure is financial, based off of voluntary trade of goods and services. Now, you may argue that certain things are immoral, like let's say prostitution is something. I'm sure Andrew would argue, saying like, hey, that's an immoral system, and the free market will give it to us. Or let's say porn on our cell phones whenever we fucking want it, and the free market will give it to us. Yes, there are immoral things that are engaged in that system, but the system itself is amoral and does not have immorality baked into it. It is up to the people. It is up to the people living in a community to enforce the way that they purchase and enforce their communities and their culture and cultural exchange to change their community for the better. It is not up to the government to try and morally grandstand and create morality, because the government will never fucking do that.
All right,
Okay,
next
then.
question.
Fucking
Who else?
okay.
Who- raise your hand if you zoned out.
Hang on. No, I didn't zone out. I thought it was interesting. Look, You got to stop zoning out, and then you'll learn your opponent's positions better. Okay, but that aside,
his fiance is calling him out.
I'm going to do a second of self-plugging because it is my platform, the Crucible, and I just want to let
the questions
know
were already submitted, Wellspring. You had to do it in the last 12 minutes of the
J.Y.
debate.
Lewis and J.F. Gariepi on the God
Sorry,
question.
short answer. Incompatible laws are
I'm looking
resolved through
forward to
market
that. That's
forces.
towards the end
Rights
of the
are
month.
products.
We have a ton of
They
shit
have different
coming up.
demand and different
This
costs.
is the Crucible.
Cheap and popular rights will
You
thrive
never
in
know
the
what
market.
you're going to see
Expensive,
here.
weird rights
It's
will not.
always
Yeah.
fucking, some of the craziest debaters, some of the craziest debates, but also some of the best conversations. I
Sorry,
appreciate all
Wellspring.
the debaters coming on tonight. Pedro, do you have more questions?
I'm a
to
master
field?
debater.
Yes, I do. The next question comes from Zen Shapiro to the entire panel. Define rights and where do they come from?
Dude, there are whole books written about this. I feel like we've talked enough
Yeah.
about natural rights that I'll just cede this question. I apologize if I'm not giving you enough for that, but like natural right philosophy and where they come from has a lot. Like that's just too much to answer.
Well, what he's getting at is Zen's overarching argument for morality is that axiomatically he bases all morals on God and believes that only morality can come from God. And this
Right.
is an opposition, not quite an opposition. After talking with you, it's interesting. Your moral system is somewhat different than most people's, where you'll advocate for things that are immoral because you believe that they're more moral to advocate for them, actually, because it works out as a more moral system, in other words.
Well, no, I just
Right.
don't. I don't advocate for. I don't say that I don't say that you should be designing a system where the lesser evil is chosen over the greater evil.
No,
Right.
right. I get it. What you're saying is like, look, even, we may legalize all of these things and it's not that evil is going to go away. You just think that overarching system is going to be less evil than what it would be if it was state powered and controlled.
Right.
I get all that. He's just saying
Prostitution
that-
is a great example, right?
Right, exactly.
It's like I don't want child sexual exploitation. I don't want child sex trafficking, and I don't want people getting STDs. I don't want to infringe upon
Right.
people's rights. And when you get rid of laws against prostitution, all of those things go down. But that doesn't
No,
mean
right,
that
right,
prostitution's right.
I get it. I'm just saying that he's looking for a moral justification for the axiom.
I mean, there's so many like
Could be
there are
divine
Christian anarchists. There's Christian anarchists. Like there's people like Leo Tolstoy. Josiah Warren was also a Christian anarchist. There's William Batchelder Green, who was also Christian, and he was an anarchist. A lot of like
What is a Christian anarchist? Can you just define that for me?
So basically, they believe in
Christians and
volunteerism.
anarchists.
Fuck the government, right? It's very, very simple, isn't it? God is great, but fuck the government.
I mean, my understanding of it is that these anarchists only obey the command of God. They have no man who rules over them, only the Creator himself.
Lord, I'm cringing
Well,
inside.
they would say that God is. Scott is. I don't know if Scott is actually more familiar with what they say, but I don't think they consider God to be a ruler because God doesn't enforce His will upon you or something like that.
Yeah,
I'm
they
sorry,
consider.
Wait, really quick. A Christian anarchist does not believe that God is the ruler?
No.
No, he thinks that God is not a ruler because He doesn't enforce His will upon you because we have free will. That's what
Right.
they would say.
This is going to be diametrically in opposition of your Calvinist beliefs, Pedro, because you believe in predetermination and predestination. So,
Well, sir,
essentially,
it's actually very simple.
Listen, I'm not a Christian anarchist.
It's actually very simple what I believe. I
should
believe
ask
in a
a
sovereign
Christian
God of
anarchist.
all the universe who created everything and spoke everything into being. Everybody else does not.
Look, I would say you should probably talk to a Christian. Yeah,
Find a Christian anarchist and talk to them.
I would just say you should talk to a
I'm
Christian.
not.
You should talk to a Christian anarchist, but
It's funny why I have probably never met one in real life.
they're
There's
relatively
not that
small.
many of them.
But
Yeah, there's not that many of them.
to fix what Lucas is saying a little bit, they're not saying God isn't a ruler because he has no right to rule over them. What they're saying is functionally, rulers exert force and coercion over you, and God does not exert force or coercion over you. God sustains you. He gives
Tell
you
that
free
to the
will.
Canaanites. All right, next question. Luther confuses legal and moral claims and must justify why rape would be considered illegal in his system if the majority votes to rape. To rape?
Yeah, or like to make rape legal, I suppose. But I don't believe in majority rule or like if you just vote in the majority, 51%, that's the rule of law now. I don't believe in that, so I just reject that question.
All right, question rejected.
So how should rules be like created? What do you think?
What's the right percentage?
The right percentage. I would say a supermajority, and I think that if we want to talk about how society functions in general, if a supermajority of society wants something to exist and wants this thing to happen, even if I disagree with it, the supermajority is going to have the capability to do so, and there's little that I can do to stop it.
But there is a difference between somebody, like let's say we don't have a state, right?
It's okay. He accepts his role as a slave. It's all right.
No. But let's say we have 80%. There's a difference between 80% of people being willing to go into a war to allow rape to exist, and 80% of people putting a ballot to allow rape to exist. The amount of wanting those two things is very different. Somebody might want to vote to allow rape to exist, but they're not willing to go into war to allow it to exist. So the fact that you're saying if a supermajority of people want something, it doesn't really make any difference. It depends on how much do they want it. Are they willing to put their life in the line for that, or are they willing to just put in a ballot? Those are very different things, and you're just doing that to not engage with the argument that the question that Casimir was posing to you.
What part of it do you think that I've not engaged with? I don't understand your question.
So if 80, 60, 70, what percentage of people need to put in the ballot for a rape to be allowed within your state?
We'll say a supermajority, or how it functions in the United States right now. I mean, even then, if we want to go down like legalizing
Tell me a
rights,
percentage.
Tell me a percentage. I mean, you can't like trump down like democracy to a simple percentage, because we have multiple layers of democracy which exist to prevent this kind of thing from happening. So we have to get into a conversation about like holding a constitutional convention, or all these different functions of government that exist where it's not simply like a majority vote rules the day, right?
No anarcho-capitalism brings up time preference anyways.
What?
Next question. We got to wrap up soon, Pedro.
Yeah. Next question from J.Y. Lewis to the anarchist side. How can you advocate for anarchist systems if they are only possible within states protecting them from outside threats?
Real quick,
wasn't being protected.
Watch my video. That's all I have to say. Just watch my video.
I did actually watch that. I did. I watched an entire video from you on using private military contractors to protect.
That's not the entire video. It's like one slide, one bullet point on one slide.
Look, there's too much nuance.
Well, no, I don't. I think it fleshed it out pretty well. What you were saying though. Mm-hmm. I think I wasn't critiquing it. I just thought it was an interesting concept. I went back through and looked historically at examples. And, the oldest profession is often referred to as prostitution, but it's not. The oldest profession is being a mercenary.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what a private military contractor is a mercenary.
It's also what police
mercenaries are. Yeah, and mercenaries were used as far as, protection for kingdoms and small nations throughout most of history. So I didn't think it was a terrible point to make that you could use mercenary contractors to defend your nation. They're still used to this day all over Africa, things like this. The only point of contention that I had with it was I don't know what you would do in the modern era when mercenaries don't have access to drones and things like that. And I didn't think you had touched on that.
Well, it's a problem of scale,
you did,
right?
though.
I did, right? It's a problem of scale. So the issue is how big is our anarchist society? Because if the anarchist society is big enough, then there's no reason that you wouldn't be able to have drone technology or all kinds of things on retainer from multiple different organizations, right? But I also argue for the fact that, economic entanglement is a big portion of what I did. And I talked about how, Tehran, Mexico is economically entangled with Mexico. So they're not just individuals sitting on commodities and resources ready to be taxed, but they're trading partners with them. It's a bad idea for Mexico to invade Tehran right now, because if they invade Tehran, they can't necessarily guarantee that they'll be able to have the exports that they can tax as they go to Mexico and beyond on concrete blocks and tree resin. And as a matter of fact, Mexico did a terrible job of maintaining the forests and being able to make them lucrative, whereas Tehran has planted over 3,000 hectares of forest and is able to make it way more economically efficient, right? So there's a lot of things that are required for an anarchist nation to defend itself, and I go through what it is. I just reject the assertion from this anarchist individual that an anarchist nation requires the defense of outside nations in order to survive. I just think that that's both ahistorical as well as not necessarily true.
Well, one of the reasons I brought it up is because mercenaries have a terrible track record of actually winning conflicts. I went back through because I wanted to make sure that I had this right or wrong. And almost any time professional nation state has gone up against any type of mercenary force, sometimes they just buy the mercenaries outright. They literally will just go make them a better offer. And this has also happened with modern private military contractors. It actually seems to be a huge problem in the African nations right now, where PMC are still used. And I just kind of wondered what your response was to that.
Well, my response is that you're not necessarily wrong, right? Mercenaries do have less of a game in the fight than, let's say, individuals that have been indoctrinated to work for a nation, and especially against people that are defending their homeland. If you're the aggressor in the situation. That being said, that's why I made that video, right? Because it's one small piece of a much more complex way on how you defend yourself. But that being said, it's not about can you defeat the army, right? Like, it's not like, can you defeat the army? It's making it more cost prohibitive, right? Because if America wants to take over a small area in Africa, we can fucking do it right now, baby. We have the power to do it. But why don't we do it? Well, we don't do it because it's not economically advantageous to us, right? It's not a smart move to have the ire of other nation states, to get in trouble with the UN, to fuck up our trade routes for an area that has maybe some resources that's going to be expensive to try and take over. I mean, look at Afghanistan, right? Look at Iraq. We lost trillions of dollars in those conflicts, right? So the idea is not that you can mount a defense that can defeat the greatest nation states in the world. The idea is that you can mount a defense that is acceptable enough to where they look at it and they go, yeah, that's not fucking worth it. Like, I'm better off just trading with these people. Like, we're economically advantaged if we just keep trading with these people and letting them be.
And there's also something like, this is something that even the early founding fathers did. They created the difference between an auxiliary and a mercenary, even though both of them are paid for doing something. That is the difference behind the mentality of the people.
Well, auxiliary forces go back thousands of years, actually, just so you know. But I mean, I'm sure you do. But the only track record I can find of mercenaries being fielded in any way that was effective was actually to train nation armies, and that seems to be where it was the most effective. I don't think anybody would argue with that. I just thought it was an interesting concept in the PMC paramilitary, private military age. It seems like Anarchistan might actually be able to buy its own defense. Bill Gates could field his own army for 2 years by himself, and it would actually be probably fairly well trained and this type of thing. It's just It's an interesting concept to me, though, that when nations are involved, it seems that the mercenary forces are not ever really enough to take care of taking care of
the other thing too is it's a different society, right? So it's like, the way most mercenaries exist is, why do nation states throughout history hire mercenaries? It's because they have an ineffective army more often than not. They have resources.
That's not the reason at all. I'm sorry. Mercenaries are bought to go on high-risk missions so that they can save their own military in certain situations.
Sometimes.
I would say both are probably
true.
They
also hire them to train. They hire them to train their militaries often. Like the Japanese. The Japanese, this was an interesting thing. He led me down this primrose path, so I had to go look into it all.
That's awesome. I love it.
So one of the things that was interesting is when the Tokugawa shogunate was overthrown and the Japanese moved in to their new era, the Meiji era, they hired Western mercenaries to come in and train their military.
Yes.
That's what that whole movie, The Last Samurai, really was based around. And
I watched that with Scott.
They hired, but they really did that, and they went in and trained their military and this and that, and it didn't work out nearly as well as what they had when they had their devoted samurai to the nation, who, I mean, they were a hell of a force, maybe the most elite in history. So I don't know that I would go with that PMC mindset necessarily. You know what I mean? I just think there's some big holes in it when you're.
There's a lot more to this, right? Like, number one, what I'm saying is you don't have a nation state with a traditional means of raising an army, so the situation is different, and honestly, we don't know how it would turn out. Another thing that people keep blasting me about in my chat, so like I'll say it, right, is especially when talking about anarcho-capitalism or anarchism, you're talking about a lot of small communities that doesn't have a central government already. And so while you may look at this and go, well, that's a weakness because they don't have this giant army to field, it's also a strength because it's very much like Afghanistan, right? It's very much the fact that because you have all.
What the fuck did you just call it? Afghanistan? Afghanistan? No. Fucking Afghanistan. Say it right, fucker. Say it right.
Yeah, Fabian, say it right.
Afghanistan.
Say it right, Fabian.
Right? It's fuck you. What I'm saying is that one of the reasons Afghanistan is so difficult to invade and control is because you do have all of these warlords and tribal communities. And so you don't already have a central state or authority and a central structure to be able to take over and then control that state or central authority, right? Whereas with all of these other little communities, you got to take over one village at a time. You got to take over one community, one private area at a time. And then you have to create systems of governance or control and governorships. So it's a very expensive and arduous task to attempt to take over a place like that.
Well, I'm sorry to the non-ANCAP side. I know.
I apologize.
I think it's easier because ANCAP societies, by and large, haven't existed. I think it's easier to attack that ideology. So I think that's why we have the most amount of questions going towards that. I hope you guys don't feel like you're left out on this. It's just the way. It's just the way that the fucking debate flowed. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I just understand that when you're advocating for a political idea or theory that's basically never been tried before or has never existed successfully before as they lay it out.
Like communism, Dylan.
Oh, boy.
Is Yugoslavia your fucking success story there, buddy? Of communism working?
Do you want to argue with me on it, Scott? Because I will die on that hill, my friend. Die on it.
Gross.
Why, of all
Scott,
hills?
I'm gonna get a Cosplay flag and just put it behind me.
All right, so next question from John Hoffman.
For that.
Yeah. Next question from John Hoffman. Is voting acceptable in an ANCAP community, or does it necessitate agreeable beforehand? Is this therefore not a democracy?
We've already answered this question so many times, man.
Yeah. We've answered this a bunch of times.
So
long as it's voluntary, it's fine.
All right, that was the last of the questions. So
sorry.
Impressively, we got all through it. No, sorry. Why say sorry?
Okay, I'll do it. No, Gazi Kodo, Black Hitler, nobody? Okay.
No.
Wait, what? Oh,
Hey,
that guy.
You didn't get my Mario Kart joke, therefore I don't have to get your joke.
No, it's cool. It's cool.
No. The kingdom of
Okay, that's it. We're gonna fight on that. You
It's
get in here right now.
it's the best Yugoslavia ever.
You get in here.
There's
You
never
argue
been
with me
a
right.
Yugoslavia like it before.
Oh, gross.
You get in here. You argue with me. I stand for that flag.
Gentlemen, you're going to have to shout out your channels. We have to wrap it up. We're at the 3-hour mark. Of course, when we do a team debate, they're always going to run a little bit longer. Can we start with the non-ANCAP side tonight? By the way, these debaters set the entire debate up themselves and just presented us. We thank all of them for thinking of us to host it. It's a privilege. We sure appreciate it. Moving over to Looter, shout yourself out, please.
Yeah, I guess you guys can find me at twitch.tv/itslooter. Same with Twitter. It's Looter. I think the last thing that I want to say is I just want to thank both you, Fabian and Lucas, for coming on this platform and debating us. I think it was a pretty good discussion. I was happy to have it, and I want to thank both Pedro and Andrew for hosting us. I appreciate it, guys.
You're welcome, sir. You're welcome back anytime.
We'll have that theology debate someday, Pedro. I promise.
Yeah. If we can move
sure.
on to the ANCAP side, Lucas, if you don't mind shouting your channel out.
Yeah, once again, my name is Robbinthestate. You can find me on Twitch, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. I don't really use Twitter, but, I'm there too. And I normally talk about video
listening
games.
to fucking Fabian over here too much about the fucking Twitter. Go where there's reach, bro. Don't listen to that bullshit. We don't live in a stateless society yet. You still gotta have reach, man. Anyway,
fair.
go ahead.
If I had an editor, I would.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you can find me on Twitch, Instagram, Twitter, everywhere. Robbinthestate. Normally playing video games and talking about comics. I'm gonna start doing video essays soon about talking about pop culture and stuff like that too. And I want to thank Andrew and Pedro for hosting the debate. You know, it was a very fun debate, and I will say probably, I don't know how if Scott agrees with this, but this is actually been probably one of the most good faith debates that I've had so far from my opponents. So I appreciate that, and I want to congratulate them for doing that. And
even the communists,
for being my
even
partner.
the fucking communists. Are you?
No, Dylan is pretty good faith. I'll give him credit for that. I've faced.
We love
worse.
Dylan. Dylan's been an ardent supporter of the Crucible from the beginning. We give him a lot of shit, right? But he's like the kid brother that I didn't get to kick the shit out of enough, right? Dylan, shout
if
that
that would have
fucking.
happened, he wouldn't be a communist right now.
That's right. Dylan,
Yeah.
shout that channel out, brother.
Yep. Well, I'm gonna do that before Andrew needs to kick the shit out of me. So I will say, YouTube, Dylan Blay, Spotify. I release my own music under the name Dylan Blay as well. You can find me at Twitter at the handle at Dylan Blay _. You can find me on Instagram as well. Plan on starting to stream soon. Although I know everyone here doesn't want to hear me rattle about my commie ideas for too long. So, you know, that one's up in the air still. Thanks for having me. Much appreciated. Thanks to Looter for being my partner. Thanks for Scott and Lucas for debating us tonight. Thanks for Pedro and Andrew for moderating us. Very much appreciated. Happy to be here. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, we were happy to have you. And of course, Dylan will probably be coming on about once a month to have one of his evil debates, the little bastard. But we just kind of, you know, he grows on you. He's like an evil mole, right?
Or like a communist parasite, socialist parasite, right, guys?
All communists are parasites.
You're up, Fabian.
I know about it.
Yeah, you actually survived communism for 14 years. So are we good? Oh, okay, cool. Sorry, I saw Andrew. You good?
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
sorry.
Let
You were like, oh,
me
sorry.
say
On my end, you guys were
that
lagging
with
out for a second. I
all
apologize.
this business,
Mine too.
Yeah, so
Goddamn
Fabian Liberty.
communists.
I am Scott from Fabian Liberty. We are a duo stream. I do most of the debates and stuff. However, my co-host does not. That being said, you can find us on twitch.tv/Fabian Liberty. Same name on YouTube. Hopefully, we'll be starting a Rumble here soon. Look out for that. Join our Discord if you find either our YouTube channel or our stream, because I think our Discord is probably way better, and you get to see CTV and Andrew fucking yelling at each other, and it's hilarious. That being said, this was a great debate. It actually was really good. I appreciate Looter and Dylan for this, as well as Andrew. You know, I don't know that I like the way that you debate,
Let
but I
me
will
say
say I
only
love the
this,
way that you moderate.
that with
I think you did a
all
great
this
job tonight, and I appreciate it. And
goddamn
maybe we'll see you guys on here in the near future.
Fuck you, Fabian. Get off my channel. Everybody have a great fucking night. Take
Right.
care.
Remember
Later.
to like, share, and subscribe this
Yeah,
video.
well,
Thank
here's
you
the
so
Oh,
much.
salute from Argentina. Oh yeah.
You fucking leave me alone. And did that work? No. So stupid me.
You just watched a clip from our Twitch channel, Fabian Liberty. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe here on YouTube, or go ahead and give us a follow on twitch.tv/Fabian Liberty.